Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Can everyone hear me pretty well? Great. My name is Kevin Lemoyne. I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Academic Affairs and Research here at the Coordinating Board, and I work very closely with Dr. Susan Barnes, who I believe many of you know as the Senior Director of Teacher Quality. Thank you.
Educator Quality, actually.
We got together several months ago and began talking about what we need to do given some proposed rule changes that were going forward to the board in July related to the approval process for new bachelor's programs. And we thought it was a perfect opportunity to get a group of people together from in the education field to review the board-approved curricular requirements that pertain to educator prep programs, consider the possibility of making some modifications, and then integrating those into our standards for bachelor's programs. We'll explain that a little bit more in detail in a little while, but I'd like to also introduce you to Dr. McGregor Stevenson. He's the Assistant Commissioner of Academic Affairs and Research, and he wanted to spend a moment greeting you.
Thank you all very much for coming. Fino, if you're in the back listening, I'm sorry I moved the microphone. Kevin made me do it. Our technical staff really prefers that the microphones not be moved around, so just so you know, if you see somebody come charging out of there after you move a microphone, that's all they're doing. It's okay. But regardless, my name is McGregor Stevenson. Thank you all very much for your willingness to come here in the middle of summer and with 100-degree weather looming and with all kinds of other activities I'm sure could be taking place at your home campuses and in your personal lives. But as Kevin mentioned, we are looking at making revisions to our baccalaureate and master's program approval process to allow your institutions more autonomy in selecting new degree programs. And in order for us to be able to effectively do that with teacher education, obviously based upon the certification requirements and the minimum standards that have to be met, we felt like it was an excellent opportunity to bring you all in and to give you an opportunity to give us the benefit of your thoughts on the matter and ways in which we might be able to improve our existing standards, to make any revisions necessary so that they can be incorporated before we begin the new process of program approvals. And so we do appreciate the time that you're taking to come in today and tomorrow and to give us the benefit of your knowledge and experience. And to that end, I know Kevin and Susan have been working diligently preparing for this discussion, and we appreciate your input and guidance on this, and we look forward to the outcomes. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it, and I'm afraid I'm late for a staff meeting, so if you will please excuse me. Thank you again.
And just one clarification I'll make. We'll try not to keep you past 3 o'clock today. Not tomorrow. That's okay. A little housekeeping. I'd like to welcome those who are watching via the broadcast, and I'd like to give you the pathway to 2 documents that this group will be looking at today. If you go to the Texas Higher Education website homepage, and I think we're going to post that on the broadcast as well. Click on Academic Affairs, then Academic Programs, and then Educator Preparation. Scroll down to the bottom of that page, and there are 2 documents under the heading Educator Preparation Program Guidelines. And 2 documents we'll be looking at today. One is titled Undergraduate Programs, and the second one is titled Timeline of Legislative and Board Actions. And if everyone will bear with me, I'll repeat that one more time for the folks at home. The pathway is THECB homepage, Academic Affairs, Academic Programs, Educator Preparation. 2 documents at the bottom of the page that are posted, Undergraduate Programs and Timeline for Legislative and Board Actions. Just wanted to make sure that if anyone's listening and watching that they have access to the materials that we'll be talking about today. One other housekeeping thing for those of you who are here and who have RSVP'd. Cheryl will be collecting lunch money right now. If you hadn't had the chance, if you're a visitor and hadn't responded to Cheryl's email early on, please let her know, and she'll be happy to order lunch for you. All right? Well, okay, so let me basically state again what we think is the purpose of this meeting. Many of you may know by now that the coordinating board staff have proposed some changes to the rules relating to the approval of new degree programs at the bachelor's and master's level. Those rules are going to the July board meeting. The Academic Affairs and Research Committee of the board met this past Monday to consider the proposed rule changes, and they were very receptive to them. I just wanted to give you an outline of what those changes are, if you haven't heard of them already. Has everyone heard of those proposed rule changes? Have you seen them?
No.
No? Okay. Well, let me tell you what they are. Basically, it's going to significantly streamline the approval process for new bachelor's and master's programs that meet certain criteria. And the criteria would be, if approved by the board in July, that the program has institutional and governing board approval, that the institution certifies compliance with the standards for new bachelor's and master's programs, and that's a document that's been that was developed about 3 or 4 years ago and is posted on our website. The institution certifies that adequate funds are available to cover the program. That's a legislative requirement. New costs during the first 5 years of the program would not exceed $2 million. That's the threshold at which a proposal for a new program actually goes to the board. The program is non-engineering. It would be offered by a university or health-related institution, and there are no objections to the proposed program received by the coordinating board during the initial 30-day comment period. So in other words, if a new bachelor's program were developed at the institution level and received Board of Regents approval and met all of these other criteria, you wouldn't have to submit a proposal to the coordinating board for approval of that program. The approval would be automatic if these rule changes are approved by the board in July. Does that make sense to everyone? And so in that context, we thought it was important to look at the standards for new bachelor's and master's programs. One of the standards has to do with teacher certification components of bachelor's programs. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with all of the legislative and board-approved curricular requirements that are in that chart that's in your packet that we'll be going over today. We thought that this was a good opportunity to consider how can we ensure that we continue to meet the legislative requirement in terms of the limit of semester credit hours in education courses, but also at the same time consider the other curricular requirements to ensure that students finishing your programs are well prepared to go into the teaching field. Another kind of general question is, does there need to be statewide consistency across programs in terms of the curriculum? These are the sort of the general questions that we've been thinking about and wanted your input on. To give you just a quick overview of what we're going to do today, Susan Barnes is going to talk about the history of statutory and board-approved actions, and that's in your packet. We'll then go on to look at the chart that details the current curricular requirements that I'm sure you're all familiar with. We thought it would be a good idea to break us all into groups later on during lunch to discuss some of these issues. Then we'll come back as a large group and share what we've talked about and possibly formulate some recommendations for change. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll talk about, do we want to meet again? When would that be, and what topics of discussion you'd like to include? If there aren't any questions, then I'll hand it over to Susan Barnes. Actually, it might be nice to go around really quickly and introduce ourselves. Again, I'm Kevin Lemoyne.
Susan Barnes.
Myrna Cohen from the University of Houston Downtown.
Beth Peltz, University of Houston Downtown.
Viola Garcia, University of Houston Downtown.
Jan Schaefer, Texas State University, San Marcos.
Carolyn McCall, Texas State University.
Melissa Pearson, University of Houston.
Vera Hutchison, University of Houston.
Jackie Hawkins, University of Houston.
Pam Tipton, Texas Tech.
Susan Dennis, West Texas A&M.
Jan Ray, West Texas A&M.
Brian Miller, Sam Houston State.
John Miazga, Angelo State.
Bill Geiger, UT Tyler.
Bill Holmes, Lamar University.
Jill Burke, Tarleton State University.
Roy Hurst, UT Permian Basin.
Jane Owen, Midwestern State University.
Hollis Lowry Moore, Lamar University.
Marilyn Bartlett, Texas A&M University, Kingsville.
Humberto Gonzalez, Texas A&M International, Laredo.
Ana Maria Rodriguez, University of Texas Pan American.
Hector Ochoa, UT Pan American.
Jim Crockett, A&M, College Station.
James Sherrill, the University of Houston, Clear Lake.
Jerry Whitworth, Texas Women's University.
Arthur Hernandez, Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
Sherry Johnson, UT Dallas.
Great, thank you so much. Folks in the audience, would you like to stand up really quickly and introduce yourselves and let us know where you're from? We're happy that you've joined us.
I'm Jenny Fender from UT Tyler. Linda Ballard, A&M Texarkana.
Bertha Benavides, Texas A&M International.
Hey, Ron Anderson, Texas A&M International.
Mona Weinberg, CREATE, the Center for Research, Evaluation, and Advancement of Teacher Education.
Brett Mangus, Texas A&M Conference.
Arma Harper, Texas A&M University System.
Great. And Risa?
Risa Potter with the Council of
Great, thank you so much.
Well, number one, I want to say thank you for your attendance here. We had hoped to have maybe 20 people in person, and as it kept growing, it was like, wow, this is like Field of Dreams. I feel like Kevin Costner, but no, they don't pay me what Kevin Costner makes, but that's all right. I think Kevin's given us a very, very good grounding for why we think this is a good opportunity to visit what we've been doing for a while and really look at where we want to go, and the possibilities, I think, are very good that we can affect some changes that will make our programs stronger and our teachers more effective. Some of you, I have to say thank you again for spending the day with me. We were at the CREATE conference yesterday, so they got a little bit of a hint of what we were going to do today, so bear with me when we go back over some of the ground, but this is very much a working meeting. I want to walk you through, you have to bear with me a little bit, the history of how we got where we are. I'm one of those folks who was here when the bill that ended the education degrees was enacted. I was, in fact, the Director of Teacher Education at TEA when the Senate bill went through. So much of the history is, it's like I was part of the history, working with the coordinating board, Bill Sanford, Francis Sage, some of you may remember those names, and that's the back and forth that went on between the agencies as the interpretations were put in place that we now implement. And I have, since I came back into the role a year ago, in visiting with folks, it was really clear to me that there are a lot of people who aren't as old as I am and don't remember how we got, to this place and what we're doing with the way we do our programs. And in some ways, as a history teacher, I have to stand with my discipline and say, if we don't know what we did in the past and we just keep making policy decisions without any kind of foundation in history, we'll make those same mistakes again. So I think we need to at least revisit how we got where we are. And so I will take full responsibility for any errors or omissions in the little chart that we put together. And I want to spend a little bit of time going over this, 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the most. But within this little chart, you will find the seeds or the roots of whatever blossomed into what we have right now. I will also say that I was able to create this basically on the fugitive documents that I've been able to find in various files and folders. So I know one or two pieces I don't have. I know from things that referred back to them that they exist. So I asked John Beck yesterday, I said, John Beck, do you still have a copy of the 1987 standards? And he said, I don't believe I do. And of course, I can't find them anywhere. They're not codified on the web. We're also used to the web now. You go and get anything. Well, I can't find the 87 standards on the web. But trust me, some of what we're living with come from the 87 standards. And if you weren't born until after 87, you don't remember what was in them. All right, so let's look at what really starts our foundation here, and that's the little chart. I tried to highlight within the paraphrased little sections the pieces that kind of flow through that we're living with. You're familiar that 1987 was when Senate Bill 994 was passed, and that basically required an academic major or interdisciplinary academic major, including reading, other than education, which is related to public school curriculum. All those pieces we're pretty familiar with, but sometimes I think people forget related to public school curriculum is in there. And I tend to later on, I just started going IAM for interdisciplinary academic major. It's just way too long to keep saying. This is where we were allowed 18 semester hours of education, and note it included student teaching at this time. So programs had to make significant changes. There were programs, those of you will remember, for a bilingual certificate, I believe the specialization area was 54 hours. Just for the specialization for bilingual. Special ed was about the same. So significant changes were affected. In December, Coordinating Board adopted some guidelines, and in the bold piece there, you'll see where this is where we got the structure for the 48 undergraduate semester credit hours with the 21 upper division hours. That's where that comes from. Undergraduate academic courses, but not teaching methods or pedagogy in reading, early childhood education, special ed, bilingual ed, and English as a second language could be included in the interdisciplinary academic major. And no more than 18 semester hours could be in those specializations. So the specializations were limited to the 18 hours. Reading, for those of you who weren't around, reading was kind of treated late in the legislative process. That's why the grammatical construction is so odd. That piece that says including reading in the bill wasn't there originally. It was added on the floor. And so that was trying to keep some reading as a content area within the interdisciplinary academic major. That created lots of back and forth on where does reading belong, how many hours can you have, and and so there actually is some inconsistency in the documentation, but we won't go into that. If the 18-hour block in one of the 4 areas is selected, the specializations, what we call the specializations, then at least 30 semester credit hours would be taken in 3 of the following, and that's the list you're all familiar with. So that part has been in place for a very long time. And what's important, I think, in our discussion is to remember what is statute and what is board policy, i.e. interpretation. This interpretation was very foundational, and this interpretation, if you go back and read the letters that were sent out, the staff went back and looked at legislative intent, they looked at the testimony, they looked at a number of things in crafting this interpretation. So I think that's important to remember at that time. So legislative intent, even if you're a constructionist, you can look at the legislation. You could kind of poke holes in a few places in the legislation. That's why they went back and got legislative intent to say, okay, just because you wrote it this way, can it be interpreted this other way? And no, it needs to. This is the interpretation we want, and well, that's where we are. In December of '87, there is also another communication that went out, and what's important, I think, here is that the interpretation says the interdisciplinary academic major programs must satisfy the 1987 standards. For those of you unfamiliar with the 87 standards, those are the ones that were based on semester credit hours. And I hope someone can help me verify this. I think that the 6 hours of reading in elementary were part of the old 87 standards for the elementary teacher. Is that correct? I was hoping you'd remember that. That's why I was looking for the standards. I can kind of verify where everything came from in the current chart except for the reading requirement and the math science beyond the core. So I'm thinking that the 1987 standards might also have had a number of semester credit hours in science and math. And once the core went in place, we tied it to the core. But before that, I think there was a number there. I just can't simply verify it. But the 1987 standards were in place when this went through. And we'll note that SBEC has moved away from the semester credit hour approach and has gone with what we call now the standards approach. Okay? So the rest of these, I give you this almost as a way, if you want to document a lot of work went into trying to maintain certain things. In January, there were still issues going on what was an education course and what is not an education course. And there's a series of letters that went out saying, here's how we're going to decide what is an education course or not. They'll look at prefixes, titles, descriptions, and the letter also addressed the methods courses and reading, whether they could be included in the interdisciplinary academic major. The answer here was yes. And whether methods courses and the other 4 specializations could be part of the interdisciplinary academic major, and the answer was no. Reading was treated separately because of that language in the bill. In March of '88, we started looking at how the 18-hour block of education courses would be defined as education, still again. Whether we go back now to whether the key here was whether the interdisciplinary academic major requirements could be exceeded. In other words, if you wanted to have more coursework than what was required in that 48 hours, and the answer was yes, you could. So in '88 September, we're still dealing with what the coordinating board was using to approve your programs, and how did we look at the construction of the major. And I think this is still important. The guidelines then were to look at the comparability of degree requirements between teachers and non-teacher preparation students. That interpretation still basically holds. That's been the guideline and has been used since this time. You had to assure that courses required in the general education major and the minor or academic courses, still worried about exceeding the 18 hours of education. And this is when the likelihood the program could be completed in 4 years, and that's that guideline of the 139 hours and no more. Many of the education courses were longer than 139 hours at that time, and so the 139 hours was actually seen as a bit of a cap, wasn't it? So we know where we are now. The other two are really not as important. They're still reiterating the integrity of the academic degree, the degree. If you look in number 3, it's similarity programs for fields for people not planning to become teachers. You know, that's just a string that goes all the way through here. Now, November of '88, there is attention about the 4th line down to the post-baccalaureate certificate. There were, you probably don't remember this, but there were a number of programs that were moving, the state had been moving in many places to a 5-year program. Kind of that MAT program, the Holmes Group was looking at some 5-year programs, and there were some institutions that really wanted to do 5-year programs. And so there was a string of conversations about, did you have to, was there a way to do that or not do that? And that tied in with the post-bac piece. And at this time, that 4th line down, this is the period of time when the post-bac program had to be offered for undergraduate credit and funding only. That later changes, but you need to know that at one time that whole initial certificate piece was seen as an undergraduate function. So let's move down to 1991, and this is where, when the Centers for Professional Development and Technology were established, there is language that says, for a comprehensive field-based teacher education program to supplement the student teaching hours that had the 18-hour limit. This is where we get the 24 hours. And what's interesting about this, and I haven't raised the flag too far, we'll just raise the rock just a little bit. the 6 hours, the additional hours for field-based student teaching are related to the Centers for Professional Development. Just note that. All right. The language of this statute, when was re-entered into the rewrite of the code in 1995, this original statute was much longer, and it was shortened way down to about 3 paragraphs. The centers are still there. The option for the field-based coursework is still there, but there was a lot of optional language on what you could do with these centers. That was all taken out when they rewrote the code. So the key part that we need is still there. Now that we have the Centers for Professional Development raised a whole new set of issues and questions. How do you transition to this? Basically, in '93, the coordinating board said we're really looking at the same guidelines for your interdisciplinary academic major, and the 139 hours still operated. There were programs that were thinking there were a little more flexibility there, I think, than what we thought. In '94, we made an important change that allows the post-bac initial certificate programs to be offered at the master's level. That's the change, the interpretation that now is basically operating in case you want to go in that direction. All right, '94. See, we're speeding right along. We've covered 10 years in like 10 minutes. Changes to the guidelines for the post-bac initial certification program. This is where they went into detail on what you had to be doing if you wanted to do the graduate program. I don't want to focus on that, but I do want to look down at the next paragraph, which is the definition of field-based courses. This is the definition we still use. This is the definition for the review of field-based funding, and that's where that comes from, and I thought you would want to have that. In October of '94, there was more guidance now on this 18 hours. And what's really important, again, to be participating in the 24 hours, your institution had to be a participant in a designated Center for Professional Development and Technology. Now, these centers don't really exist anymore, right? So just note that that's a little bit of an issue. And I don't know how we got from there to here. In '95, Texas Education Code was rewritten. A lot of it was recodified, and I just put in here the recodification so that you'll know the original bill was in Section 13, and now we operate under the 21.050. That's what you're familiar with, but if you went back to the law, you wouldn't find that. And sometimes it gets a little hard to trace that. They did keep in the Centers for Professional Development, and the option for the field-based program is still there. In '96, we were looking at moving, once again, the field-based course issue came up, and the highlighted part is the test for determining if a course is included in the academic major or not. This is still reiterating once again how we determine what an education course is versus an academic course. I put it in here primarily to let you know that it hasn't changed. I mean, that guideline is still there, and it's been pretty consistent. What is interesting is we state pretty clearly that non-centers for professional development are limited to 18 hours, including student teaching. Oh dear, oh dear. I am missing a document, really, and I've been back through the board minutes and the board actions for the agenda for January of 1997. And that's where the core curriculum has a report that goes to the legislature. There's a report on teacher preparation. No action was taken, but it seems to me as if nothing really changed. But I just want you to know there was something official. You may have a letter, there might be something in your file that came out in '97 that I don't have. If you find it, it'd be nice to have. I don't find any change in direction between what I do have and what I, on both sides of it, but I'd like to know if there was anything that we reiterated or changed. Anyway, I think it was really marrying what we were doing in educator preparation with the core curriculum piece, and I think that's where the 6 hours of science or beyond the core requirements. I think maybe that's where that gets put together, but I don't have it. In 96, there is language that I think is important for our operation right now. And in that second sentence, it says, the court...
96 or 97?
I'm sorry, 99. Sorry, I looked at 76 legislature. The CB, in cooperation and advice of SBEC, will adopt educator preparation guidelines that promote, to the extent practicable, the integration of subject matter knowledge with classroom teaching strategies and techniques in order to maximize the effectiveness and efficiency of coursework. I think that's a very important statute, and I think that's something that we need to be thinking about as we have these conversations going forward. I think that statute certainly offers an opportunity and a foundation for us to have conversation about this integration of subject matter and knowledge of classroom techniques. We might need to look at what that means, and do we have we achieved that, and do we need to work on it some more? In 2000, there was a memo that talks about moving to the standards-based approach by SBEC. And essentially that's the removal of semester credit hours. Coordinating Board did not go back and look at our operations in light of the standards approach. We're still based on the semester credit hour approach. In 2001, this is when SBEC moved to the relatively current structure of levels and certificates, the EC4, the 4.8, the 8.12, and so there were communications dealing with how that was going to go forward, and this requirements for approval of new and revised undergraduate programs is the chart that you're familiar with. The forms that you send to us are based on this chart. I want to point out, I thought it was very interesting, and I put this in here knowing that you would love it. Concerns expressed by IHEs about fulfilling requirements for 3 bodies led the Coordinating Board and the State Board of Educator Certification to develop requirements. So this little problem of having to serve 2 or 3 masters is not a new problem. The last part of this paragraph I thought was important because it says the memo is not intended to clarify existing policies and statutes rather than convey any policy changes. So what you have in the chart is really a compilation of things that had evolved over time. This is what we're operating right now. The new thing that happened in 2005, as you're aware, is the statutory limitation on the semester credit hours, commonly interpreted as the 120. There is, as we all know, an important sentence: the institution can determine whether there is a compelling academic reason to allow a degree program to require additional credit hours beyond the 120 provided by the statute. So that was an important change and most recent. The last 2 things here are really just in July and October of last year, in an effort to be more efficient and move things along, the Coordinating Board determined, after conversation with SBEC, that if your program was approved already for an EC4 or an EC4 bilingual special generalist or an EC4 ESL generalist in October, that the Coordinating Board, because of the nature of the degree structure and the coursework, the plan that you were implementing, was not a significant change, that we would automatically approve your moving from an EC4 to an EC6. If you had already gone through the process, you were fine, you had what you were approved for. If you were in process, you could withdraw your proposal. You didn't have to send a proposal in at all. Part of that became about because of discussions with the academic area about the direction they were moving in terms of your new degree approval process, that we're getting close to the end, I think. At this time last July, this was very early in the discussion. And so all we did at that time was to send the letter out saying, if you've got this in place, you're approved. Kevin's area is working right now on a 3rd letter that would deal with the language change from 612 to EC12, and I think that's moving forward. So there will be another entry at one point when we get the language other than English letter out. And I think potentially when if Chapter 5 rules change and this process changes, there will be, there will be another entry that codifies that change. So that's kind of a walk through history. But I think it's important, honestly, to have a sense of where we are. Pull out your chart real quickly. I won't go into great detail on the chart because really now everything on this chart on the coordinating board requirements, you know where it came from. On the right column is the SBEC column. Remember, this was put out after conversation between the two agencies to be consistent and let you know what's going on. Well, the SBEC column really probably we need to go back at some point and ask them to update it, although it's been updated since they moved to the standards, because I think there's some important things in here you need to look at. Under reading, for example, well, let's look at the first one. SBEC encourages educator preparation coursework that to the greatest extent possible integrates subject matter knowledge with classroom strategies. That's referring to that piece of statute I called your attention to. Then they move into the place that now says you need to have a sufficient amount of reading. The semester credit hour requirement that used to be there, I'm sure, in the first version or under the 87 standards went away. So now it's a sufficient amount. The Chapter 230 becomes guidelines down in about the fourth or fifth line. So there's a significant shift in, and this documents, I think, the significant shift in the SBEC requirements and philosophy that goes through this whole chart. We don't need to go in anymore, but those are examples of how SBEC's piece has changed to a standards-based approach documented here. Do you have questions or comments? I don't want to just talk. I was never a lecturing teacher. So comments or thoughts? Overwhelming?
I appreciate this chart.
It's what we've lived with.
Really helpful.
Okay. Well, that one's an old chart. That's a good chart. That's the one that the SBEC chart is the one that's on our website. It matches the forms you fill out. So when you go through, often when people fill out the forms and they don't go and look at the chart and say, okay, what am I supposed to be putting in here? That is not sufficient. I think one thing Kevin and I have talked about is if the board moves in the direction of not having, for example, we won't have you submit those forms anymore. I want to make sure you understand what we're doing here. This makes a significant change in what your work life should look like. The forms could be a work document to help you verify that if this chart changes not a bit, the charts match it, you work through there, and you can say, yes, I am meeting this standard. I will fill out Kevin's piece of paper. It says, yes, I meet the standards, and I do whatever I do to get your new program approved. So it takes away the necessity of your sending us paperwork to review. Now, I think that raises some other issues. Yes, Bill.
Susan, maybe going ahead.
No, that's fine.
SBEC, I'm thinking of a recent example in Spanish that we had to submit to SBEC, even though it had been approved. And we had to show how each of the standards was being addressed and where it was being assessed and how it was being assessed. If they say yes to that program, is that what justifies checking yes on Kevin's form, or are they totally unrelated?
They're totally unrelated, because would you like to answer that? You're the degree person.
Right. So the standards or the guidelines, the curricular requirements that you have here, you would have to certify that, yes, we meet all of those. If these continue to exist in the format that they are. If through this discussion you recommend any changes and we take those to the boards, then we'd integrate those into here. But still, you'd be As part of your certification of the standards for new bachelor's programs, you would be certifying that you comply with all the statutory and board-approved curricular requirements.
And in making that judgment, that means both the course-based requirements that may be of historical interest and the standards-based requirements of SBEC, or does it mean that we're recognizing that the standards-based have superseded the course-based?
When we're talking standards, we're talking two sets of standards. You're talking SBEC standards for the certification of the teacher. Kevin's talking standards for bachelor's, master's programs. Those are not the same standard in a way. When you check, Mark, on our application to Kevin's area that you're meeting the educator standards, whatever that would be our column. Does that make sense? And that our column is what we're talking about right now. I'm very graphic.
Thanks for clarifying.
Well, we had the same problem with college and career readiness standards, which are content standards, and House Bill 3 has college and career readiness standards, performance standards, and people have to start using academic, content standards and performance standards, because otherwise they're talking in two different things. Yes, ma'am.
Something else on your question. We have to have coordinating board approval to offer the certificate before SBEC will even look at it.
Correct.
So,
and that's when you submit your degree and you go through this process, that is your approval. And then you go to SBEC.
But the other way around.
Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Out
I
of
think one of
curiosity,
the
I know that you all only regulate public universities. So do private and do entrepreneurial degree offering things try at all to line up with y'all's standards?
If
or
they
are they
do,
totally
it's
and just
their
it's up to
choice.
them? They have to just comply with
SBEC.
SBEC and
That's
nothing.
correct.
So
Right.
that's what I thought. Okay.
Right.
Nice.
All right.
And so one of the things that we're assuming will take place in this discussion today is to what extent do the current course-based requirements that are reflected in our chart are meeting the SBEC standards, meeting the needs of the SBEC standards. Does that make sense?
Let me give an example. The SBEC is encouraging us to integrate subject matter knowledge with classroom teaching strategies. If I take a mathematics course that is part of the academic major, they infuse some discussion or examples from teaching, doesn't that take it out of the academic major?
Nope. Let's look at this.
They're not going to have non-teacher preparation people take that course.
Well, let's look at the third page of this chart, which is a difficult page. And I have to make a correction, actually. I have corrected copies. I didn't catch something till this morning. We had to retype this, and so there is an important change that I need to make. And I will not tell you what it is so that you'll stay with me as we look at this. This has been kind of a frustrating page for many of us for many years. Because, and I understand why it is, and I don't have a really great solution to that problem. Here, that's the change. You can see why this page exists when you walk through the history of all the communications that have gone out with the field in response to questions and concerns about how do you determine if a course is education or not. And I think historically this is how we have made that determination. The course that includes as its primary content education topics such as teaching strategies, models of instruction, curriculum development, assessment, classroom management is considered an education course. And then when you come down to the part that blends, the course that blends academic subject matter, which I think is what you're asking, it's the focus of the course that determines its classification. If the course primarily focuses on education topics such as curriculum and teaching, rather than the academic subject matter, is classified as, and this is where the correction comes in. This is a mistype. It should say education course. We had to retype this chart, and if you drop down one line, you pick this up, so please make that change. I have corrected copies of the chart if you want to have them, and I'll pass them around, but I didn't want to add one more piece of confusing paper. So that's a critical change. Yes, ma'am. I will. When a course blends academic subject matter and pedagogy, it is the focus of the course that determines the classification. If the course content focuses primarily on education topics, such as curriculum and teaching, rather than on the
Academic
content. No, that's the.
You're right.
Oh, okay. Academic. Yes, that's right. Academic subject matter. It is classified as an education course. That's where you have to make your change. Conversely, if the course content focuses primarily on academic content, it's an academic subject matter course. So they give you two examples of mathematics. Now, you know, we can spend a lot of time parsing this out and go back to whether the department would accept, you know, a non-teaching candidate taking that course, which has been historically kind of where this all has been. Or we can go ahead and talk about where we want to go. Does that make sense? We can either look backwards or we can look forwards. I can go through and find some inconsistencies here, because we say we don't look at prefixes, we don't look at whatever or who teaches, but our examples do exactly that. Gives you the prefix, gives you the faculty member, and it should be the content, the focus of the course. I mean, we almost shot ourselves in the foot by putting too much stuff in there. And I think that's been part of the problem. This is confusing. And so, now, I say that because we get back to the point when we get to the new process and it's your responsibility to say, yes, my program meets these guidelines, standards. I think we've said here at the coordinating board, we're going to need to beef up and clarify, and we'll need some help in doing that. What do these, whatever the standards are, what do they mean, so that when you check off that yes, we meet the standards, you're clear that you know what the standards mean. And it comes down to this course. That's one of the things. The course piece, the number of hours that you can deal with in education or not. And so we have some cleanup work on our end. So your conversation today to say, here's where I've run into a problem. Here's where we've struggled with this. Don't focus on the paper filling out part of it, because I hope we're past the paper filling out part, the form filling out. What I want to focus on is the clarity of what we're doing, what kind of guidance we give you, what should we be doing. And I think that it's important to look at it in two ways. Statutory is one thing, and board interpretation is another. And if you go back to what the statute says, you know, it's pretty brief. The rest of it has been board interpretation, trying to maintain an academic degree, integrity, trying to maintain the limitation on hours. You know, those are the two primary drivers, I think, that have been going all this time. And I think we have to give honor to that. But I think we have the opportunity to look at the interpretation, certainly. And I think, you know, if the conversation needs to start, whether it's time to revisit the statute, I mean, I think that's something that we can talk about. We can't guarantee anything. But I think you ought to have the opportunity to start that conversation. Conversations go on anyway. Part of it is what is our role in that conversation. Does that help? Comments? Yes, sir.
Susan Brent Mangus, Texas A&M Commerce. I'm struggling here a little bit with the concept that you want to blend this. You want to blend content and pedagogy, in essence. But then your examples really split it back out again.
Right.
So I'm kind of struggling. I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? How can we do this?
Right.
And make this work so that it but it doesn't become an education or an academic content. Does that make sense?
It does.
See where I'm struggling? I'm trying to figure out, if I have a math professor teaching one of my education courses,
right,
then it becomes a content area.
No. Not necessarily.
The content of
It's the content of the course that should determine what it is.
The majority is content.
Yeah, that's these examples are poor examples because there's like a 6 by 2 matrix here. Education, not education. You got all these little elements: prefix, focus, professor, and we didn't give you all of the examples, and we only gave you a subset of examples.
So I think the problem is that to truly align these and integrate subject matter classroom teaching, you can't say that it's a content course and a case course. But the statute makes it really clear. It's one or the other, and it can't be both.
I know. We struggled with this for a long time. Obviously, the history is we struggled with it. I think that it's worth having the conversation to say this is still a problem, and what are some recommendations for dealing with this problem? And I think what I want to make sure of is the field for offering recommendations could be pretty broad. I would like to hear what your recommendations are. Yes.
Hey, I'm just thinking that now, since we have new limits on the amount of hours that we can offer, we're all looking for more efficient ways to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And really, I think an efficient route to take is to synthesize the content with the pedagogy or the methods. That just makes more efficient preparation. So I'm thinking in terms of maybe a new kind of category or doing something to encourage programs to think about creative ways to put those two together, because I think that will alleviate a lot of our distress about the limited number of hours that we have. And there's always the struggle, because we have faculty who see themselves as content area specialists plus educators, and I think they find it uncomfortable to be pushed into one category or another, because they do have that synthesis.
Do we have examples of faculty members in the education department, school, whatever, who are teaching? Let's take math. I think that's the easiest one for us to focus on because it seems to be kind of black and white. Mathematics, a mathematics course that's counting within the major. Anybody have that example?
We have joint appointments, mathematics and education.
Right.
And they teach in both areas. One of the things, those of us who choose to do NCATE accreditation, it's very difficult to get approved for an NCATE specialty organization report if you don't have what we consider the methods course in the content area. You almost can't get approval in history, science, or math if you don't have your methods course in the content area. And so that's one of the ways that we've addressed that is through that dual appointment.
Sir,
Yeah, we have, ours is actually a math professor who also has a math ed appointment with background, but I think course-wise, one that actually is, in a lot of places, I'll call it a blended course with the emphasis on the academic content, would be the Common Course Number system is Math 1350. It may have different numbers at other institutions, but the fundamentals of mathematics, that's primarily a content course, and yet it also includes a significant, I would call it a pedagogy component because of the way the courses are designed and even the way that, and that's one that's pretty much done statewide. That's primary academic. In fact, it can be taken for general education credit by non-education oriented students, and yet it does also blend in that at least early pedagogy component. Might be easier with that than some others, I don't know.
Do you think it's possible to get a new classification of a course that does merge the two, where it doesn't have to be content or education? Maybe we need a new integration classification of some type, where maybe we could count it in whichever area we needed to count it in.
I think that's a reasonable suggestion.
Partly because of the context of recent discussions about secondary students and trying to retain them, I'm excited about the possibilities of doing that.
What about, are there any mathematicians amongst us here who taught mathematics? One of the conversations that's come up about secondary mathematics has been the nature of the mathematics degree for a person who is a mathematics major. Let's pretend this person's looking toward going to work for an insurance company, getting a math degree, versus a teacher who intends to become a secondary mathematics teacher, maybe a middle school teacher, that's, let's say, 9th grade, 10th grade teacher. Talk a little bit about the nature of those majors and any issues you would raise about that. John?
Our mathematics department really doesn't want anything but a math degree. But they're willing to offer an interdisciplinary degree that is not that does not have the word math. You know, it could be an interdisciplinary degree in mathematics, but they feel that if they say this person is a graduate with a degree in mathematics, that there's a common expectation of background preparation. So we're doing interdisciplinary math physics, for instance.
Okay.
And I think that if we would have the possibility of doing an interdisciplinary secondary mathematics degree, that some of the criticisms or some of the things that people talk about why do I take this or that or whatever could be worked out and be more standards-based.
So an interdisciplinary secondary mathematics.
Well, an interdisciplinary degree leading towards secondary certification in mathematics.
Right. Okay. We could say an interdisciplinary degree including secondary mathematics certification, because at the end you'd get the certificate. Yes, ma'am.
I have a math ed degree.
Oh, good.
So I was in that. Back then, in my math methods classes were, this has been a long time ago, so I'm trying to remember, were taught in the math department, but they were invaluable to my teaching mathematics.
Sure.
Now, I also direct the alternative certification program at West Texas A&M, and we probably certify more math teachers than our undergrad program because they eventually get a Bachelor of General Studies and come to our program for the certification piece for various reasons. Okay.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So, there are some problems because they do expect that same level as someone who's wanting to go into business or industry rather. But I don't like saying a math teacher's not a mathematician either.
Sure. Okay.
One of the problems that we have experienced over and over again is our math department actually has tried to recruit someone with a PhD in mathematics that has preparation in math education. Those are just impossible to find, and so hence the faculty in the math department are traditional mathematicians, and like it or not, they're not particularly interested in preparing a person to go and teach mathematics in a middle school or a high school situation.
Right. See, they're eating their seed corn, though. Yes, ma'am.
Texas
Tell me
Tech.
about it.
It's probably similar to most other universities, I assume, but the math course that starts with the math major is Calculus 1.
That's right.
So it's basically 24, 36 hours of math starting at Calculus 1 and above, which does not necessarily, so we have many majors who do not have the content to pass the Math Texas exam because it's different.
Yeah.
And yes, they're very smart young men and women, but they're not necessarily, they are not fluent in the curriculum of, recently fluent in the curriculum of a middle school or high school math.
Sure.
So yes, we have the same problem that I think everybody else has.
That's exactly what I needed to hear was it's the START Plus.
Right.
Because the START Plus is part of the problem.
We have replication of UTeach. It's in Houston. It's Teach Houston, and the degree is offered in natural science and mathematics. It's math degrees and science degrees. They are taught by math educators and mathematicians together. All of those folks are now employed in natural science and mathematics. It is funded by NIMSY at this point. The students begin very early with an integrated classes about pedagogy and teaching of math and math content in the early courses, as well as, so they start as freshmen and they go all the way through their final years. They come to us realistically for student teaching. All of the rest of their method and academic content is taught through the math department with math educators that they fund, and they do field-based from the very beginning.
So where'd they find the math educators that John's looking for?
They took them from us.
Okay.
We had them, so they're now in NSM.
Okay. All right. Okay. So math, have we laid out issues with math, and do we have recommendations? I've heard one recommendation, which is kind of a new classification synthesis. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Comments. Mary Harris, University of North Texas. We completed some research where we reviewed the transcripts of our post-baccalaureate math completers, and of course, for the most part, they did not complete their math degrees at our institution.
Right.
They had math majors from a variety of places. We found the least relationship between their math majors in terms of the number of upper division hours completed and GPA, the least relationship between those and ability to pass the Texas, all the majors we looked at. So I do affirm our starting with mathematics. And then second, we've just had a 4 through 8 math ESL degree approved. That degree requires 30 hours of mathematics, including 3 semesters of calculus and some advanced math, but it is not the same math that is required for the mathematics major. So I just wanted to affirm the potential of what was mentioned over there.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask a...
Yes.
In the system that you have working at U of H, if the scores are poor on the exam...
Which scores?
The Texas. Yes. Then you're still held responsible for those,
We
right?
are still held responsible.
So
we do have, however, representative samples tests that they do benchmarking throughout their program to ensure that they haven't fallen off the bus by the time they get to the terminus. And consequently, we know all along if we're having to tutor and support. So, yes. But yes, we are held accountable.
The funding for the tutoring and support is coming from the...
It would come from the NSM.
Okay. And if that funding ceases tomorrow, will you go forward with this situation?
We don't.
You would?
Yes, we don't know about it.
I'm concerned, and I know that this is not about Senate Bill 174, but it looms
Oh,
there.
Sure.
So, and frankly, my feeling is the simplification of application for new degrees is so y'all have time to come follow up with the requirements and develop the standards for 174, for review of our authorization. But it seems that it is something we should keep on the table.
Sure.
That in developing a synthesis or a better way of going about the discipline-based secondary degrees, that we do understand we're going to be held responsible, not just for the Texas exam, but on out through 3 years of retention and all sorts of things. So I think education needs to have a significant piece of whatever is developed.
Yes.
The other piece with that, I understand the moving forward on it. I also want to look at the students who declare a major in their sophomore year have not yet decided as freshmen. They come in as undecided. They take initial math courses. They don't take the math courses that are the integrated math courses because at that time they're not looking at math ed. They have a cap of 120 hours plus 35 for any Texas State institution coursework, and after that they're paying out-of-state tuition. Consequently, I think it behooves us to look real carefully at the notion of when things are integrated and when they're not, and being able to help the students get out, because that's, our focus for many of us is that part. So I don't want to make it too difficult to get in, because you will never get out.
Right. Understood. So when? Other comments on mathematics structure? Yes.
I think that this discussion lends light that if the math that people are taking as majors doesn't deal with the math that's on the Texas, and we look at what ACP programs are doing with no review in terms of this board from the coordinating board, then that may help to explain why we have the problems that we do in public schools, because the state legislature assumed that if you're trained like a major, then it automatically,
But you did take calculus and can teach 12th grade.
Yeah. And the issue is that I think that may be a very critical issue that this board raises with SBEC, to really look at that, because we were told last month when we met at the TAC team meeting that when they look at these programs, they look at these for-profit ACP programs, and they say we don't look at their content because that's what they do. And I really think that SBEC, somebody needs to monitor them to the same degree that we're being monitored, because I think it has a lot of consequential validity in terms of what happens in the public schools. And I think that's, the majority of our secondary teachers are being trained alternative certified.
Right.
And as it relates to this, that 120 rule that you bring up, maybe there needs to be consideration that if somebody decides, and they're a late decider to go into teacher ed, maybe that 120 hours that 30-hour cap needs to be waived for those students. Because some students decide their junior year, or later on, I think I want to major, but it's too late. So what I'll do is I'll go the ACP route because I can't afford the...
Sure.
And maybe there needs to be policy that because of that cap, I think people who do decide to switch later on can ill afford to do so, then they go the ACP route. And I would like to see that waiver be at least considered for people who switch into teacher education. Because this way, we don't encourage them not to go, and especially when we're saying that we really need them.
Right.
I think that would help us tremendously. And that's something that I would see if this board could do that.
Other topics, we may have dealt with enough mathematics. We've got another piece right here. What other topic would be good to raise? Yes.
If we have this new approval process, what happens if you're above 120 hours and it says the compelling reason? In the approval process, would it be, we say it's 120, and it'd be interesting to see those of us who have the EC6 and, how we did that. But the question is that if a program says, well, I've got compelling reasons to go to 127, 128, it would be really nice for us as deans to see EC6 programs across the state, and the coordinating board says, this is the number of hours that they have. And, to look at the comparison, because if you have this blind, we certify, well, in order to certify, many of us are going to want to add more hours, and we feel that we have a compelling reason. And then later on, I guess after we do this, you had mentioned earlier at another meeting that should probably be an audit or of some kind to make sure that we did comply. So the question is for those of us, I'm looking at bilingual, EC6, and with the new exam. Going to an EC6 in bilingual, and then the new bilingual test, which is much broader. I think if you have problems getting bilingual ed teachers now with this new exam, it's going to be a lot harder, because I think a lot of people are not going to pass this exam if it's looking only at an oral, it's reading and writing. And yet we may feel there's compelling reason, but should there be in this process that if you go above the 120 hours, that we at least send a letter of a justification so that down the road we don't get told by the coordinating board, well, you went way above, but looking at that. And how does this process work when we really need to keep on or justify that? And that's my concern, especially in some critical areas.
And the 120-hour rule with the compelling academic reason exemption statute that was passed a couple of years ago required the institutions to monitor that, not the coordinating board. However, the changes that we've made in the program approval process have been that we are, in the approval letters, we make note that you still need to meet the statutory requirements related to this, and you have to have a process in place for limiting the number of semester credit hours and providing any and coming up with some justification for anything that goes up. In anticipation of this last legislative session, we ask all institutions to document the number of the programs that exceed 120 and the compelling academic reason. The reason we did that is because we expected the legislature to ask us, even though we were never required to collect that information to begin with, and we thank everyone for their hard work in compiling that really quickly. What we found was the majority of the cases, it was engineering programs and your baccalaureate programs leading to teacher certification that exceed 120. We'd be happy to share that information with you. I thought about giving you a summary today, but I didn't want to give you too much information. But I could ask one of our assistants to sort the database and provide us with a list of those programs that exceed 120 with their justifications.
That would be helpful. Great. Other comments?
Well, the new testing for 8 to 12 social studies.
Okay, now let's talk about it.
Well, we have a program that's 127 hours, but lots of justification on. And then the new social studies rules come along and says they've got to be taking all sorts of these tests.
Yeah.
And when that kicks in, we're clearly going to have to rearrange our program somehow. Now, the question is if I can now add a course because the university thinks there's good reason to do so, I'm home free. But are you going to come along later and say, hold it, this one's 130 hours, all the rest of them are 127, what gives?
You heard what Kevin said.
And I retire within a year, so I won't care. Well, there's your answer.
There's a new coordinating board rule about that, so don't.
That social studies testing is going to be a problem.
Right. And you know why they had to do that. So.
Bigger brother was watching.
Bigger brother's watching. All right, social studies. All right. Let's do this. I'd like to, we've got some questions for you to address while we're in working groups over lunch, but lunch is not till 12.
Right.
Okay. So I'm thinking that it probably makes some sense. Let me go back and have you focus on, we've kind of focused on the SBEC side. Let's look at the coordinating board side requirements. On general requirements, I just want to go through the 4 sections that we have in place and kind of look at those. The other thing that's happened, and I haven't had time to think this through myself, in all honesty, House Bill 3, the new accountability bill for public schools, has changed the requirements for the recommended high school program. If you're familiar with that. I'm not sure what that's going to do in terms of matrices or anything else at this point, but maybe nothing. I want to cause an anxiety. Let's lower your anxiety right now. We'll do a Madeline Hunter. We're not trying to raise you up. We're trying to lower you down. What's happening there is, for recommended high school program, the students will still have, for going to general academic institutions, the 4x4, 2 years of foreign language, 1 credit in PE, 1 credit in fine arts. By my count, that takes you to, I think it's 18 semester credit hours. The recommended high school program right now is 26, which leaves, and you'll see this number 6 electives in the bill. And the State Board of Education is not allowed to prescribe how they're supposed to take, what they're supposed to do with those other 6 hours. Which means, if you're conversant in the public school curriculum, that the communications application course will no longer be required, the health course is not required, and the technology, what we call tech apps, technology applications courses. Those 3 courses will no longer be required. They certainly can be offered. There are texts for them. So I'm not sure what, if anything, that does for. Just keep in mind that the recommended high school program piece will be changing. That may mean something for your students who are going through the process, and how many health teachers we're going to need, or tech apps teachers. Yeah. So that's just one piece. Now, when we look at our curriculum requirements, I don't see anything directly related. That's why I haven't really focused on it till just this minute. I don't think it really has implications for us other than production and where need will be. But let's talk about the chart in the sense that, and I think now is a good time. I have a corrected chart that has that one word corrected, so I'd like you to have a corrected chart before you walk out. I didn't catch it till this morning. That way you can mark an X on one if you just have to have 2 of them, and the other one is correct. I say I've been here this whole meeting, and it should be. Yeah, it is. You know how it is. You think you're correct, and you're not.
Susan?
Yes.
If we're going to go through the coordinating
just basically, yes, real quickly.
When we do that, could you kind of guide us on what's statutory and what isn't?
I will. Sorry. And statutory is pretty brief. All right. Number 1 is, okay, we're looking at the column that's just the SBEC piece. The note at the top is that part, once again, that says integrate the coursework. And that's been there for a couple of years. Number 1, the degree programs with integrity, that's interpretation from the coordinating board. Number 2A will be statutory. That's the 120 hours. The core courses is related to the board's core course requirements, and I believe that's board interpretation, correct? It's not a law, or is it a law?
No, it's law.
The 42 to 48 is law.
I think so.
Okay, I don't know.
I think so.
Now, the 18 semester credit, the 18 hours of coursework is law.
No, the 42 to 48 is not law, actually, because the history and government are included in here. That was a board decision, not a statutory decision.
The C is statutory, the 18 hours, and D is statutory. C and D come from the original Senate bill that did away with academic education degrees by name. Does that help, Bill? You had a question?
Well,
comment?
Back to the C piece.
C,
the
correct.
confusing part of the status of the field-based, whatever the proper term, CPDTs.
Yeah, right.
What is that meaningful anymore?
Yeah.
In practice, it has. I mean, in practice, it is not meaningful. SBEC just recently at the last. No one who was at the SBEC meeting besides me can help me remember. SBEC, the proposed rules are just cleaning out the rules that dealt with the Centers for Teacher, the CPDTs, and the comment, or actually, I think even the board agenda states that they don't exist anymore. I think that was a justification in the agenda. So they're not. They were funded by a competitive process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that whole piece is not there. I think that's a clear. My point out of this is we ought to clarify, and perhaps a recommendation going to the next legislative session would be a cleanup of this to somehow codify the 24 hours, at least 6 hours field-based, which is really the student teaching piece. I think we can make a rationale for that cleanup. And probably, I'll talk with SBEC. They may be trying to get the CPDTs out of code. I don't know that they are.
That's where I was going, just cleaning that up.
Right.
But preserving the 24
right.
rather than the 8.
Right. I think that's very reasonable to do, and I think that's probably very possible to do. We'll have to see why SBEC hadn't. They probably just didn't pay attention to this. It's one of those things. I'm sure I've got stuff laying around in statute that I should take out. So,
is there still field-based funding?
There
is that still in existence? And
yes.
What is the process? I mean, you still take the process for getting that?
Bill Geiger.
I know we've added field-based courses, but I don't think we've requested additional funding. I mean, that's just sort of a...
Bill asked that question recently, and I had to learn the process because I had never seen it before. But the institution does provide, make a request and provide justification for changing the coding of a particular course from one category to the one that is related to field-based funding. And then we communicate that to our data center so they can make the necessary updates in the course inventory.
And so if we look in the course inventory, that's clearly marked, right?
That's right.
Okay.
A course is identified by a 6-digit CIP code plus a 2-digit funding code.
And the funding codes you're looking for field-based are 018, I think, not 04.
Not 0.
0 what?
04, I think, is teacher education.
General.
018 is teacher education practice, and the practice, I believe, is the field-based.
Right. That's why I made the point of the definition of field-based, and there's a, help me remember this, Bill, there's a general or maybe a specific requirement for, I think it's 30 hours of field-based practice.
Supervised and evaluated.
So that's what we just worked through. So field-based is still absolutely alive. All right. So within that piece, here's the question I have, Kevin. The 42 to 48 semester credit hours of core curriculum courses, is there flexibility there? Is there not flexibility there? And I'm just asking the question. I mean,
in terms of the number of semester credit hours?
Correct.
Well,
yeah.
There's the range right now. You can't go below.
You cannot go below 42. Okay.
But
weren't the recent changes to the AAT set it at 42? No range?
The AAT.
Probably because.
Just for the AAT.
Yes, just for the AAT. That's right.
Right. I think we said 36.
No, I think it's 42.
42.
That's right.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't remember. All right, so that's what we know about general requirements. The reading requirement. This is one where we need to be very sensitive. Right now, we have 6 semester credit hours of upper division reading for EC 448 and 3 hours of similar coursework 812 EC 12. That is required by this document now. I'm not I'm neutral. Because you understand, I mean, we can certainly have the conversations. We need to be aware there'll be pros and cons about any change in that semester hour requirement. But should we have that conversation? Because you can see where you have flexibility, you can see where you don't have flexibility.
Is it for ACP, I mean, like alternate route programs too? You know, the place where I see
This
the reading
applies
being an
to
issue,
you.
okay, is when you have someone that comes in with a psychology degree who may meet most of the standards for EC through 6 or be able to pass the qualifying test and those kinds of things. But, you know, they absolutely need the 6 hours of reading. But
these don't apply to a non-university.
so they make that argument with us that it's not required. Well, these are in university-based.
This is university, but this applies to public institutions.
Okay, so it
This
is
chart.
But we can't say it's in statute. We just have to say
It's only this chart is the only place where this requirement resides, and this chart applies to publicly funded institutions. See, that's part of
we get a
what
lot of pushback on that, and I just think that's
For
interesting.
a degree leading to certification.
Yes, ma'am.
If you already have a degree and going through a post-bac or alt-cert program, it's not right.
But I guess I would kind of argue to move in the direction of SBEC. If we've moved to standards-based teacher preparation approach rather than a course-based, and that is the more contemporary approach, the standards-based is the more contemporary approach, then I would feel comfortable in aligning with the SBEC language.
Other thoughts, comments? Yes.
I think that for us, the main impact of this would be the reading in the content area for the secondary folks. And so I think that whatever we decide here is important because a lot of our content area people, like the music and the art, would be very happy to get rid of that course that we currently require at both the undergraduate and the post-bac levels.
By the same token, though, if you do not have reading for all areas and you have your TEA site visit 2 months ago, you will find out that you are not meeting state standards and you will be cited for it.
Yeah.
We did, so we actually got commended for doing what we thought we were supposed to have.
Okay.
Which implies that some people are not doing it.
Is looking at a course.
That's one of the required components is that you have reading for all. It doesn't specify how many hours, but it does specify that you have reading across the curriculum for all curriculum areas, including PE, health, art, and music. And you're right, they don't like it.
Right.
It'll actually be reading content. It won't be hours. Because they don't deal with hours. But you're going to have to show in the matrix where the reading is covered.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, Bill's point that they do have standards that cover that.
Okay. Dr. Lunam also said the board doesn't like embedded reading embedded in other courses. They want the words. They like to see a reading as a separate, but it's not required.
Correct.
So, I mean, it's sort
All
of
right.
elusive.
Other comments on credit hours or standards language here? Comments?
I think for these levels, this is kind of a minimum. I mean, it says minimum, and it's pretty.
Well, we'll let you discuss that in more depth at your table, because I think this is a really important piece to look at. Look at the math science requirement. I would say the same thing. In addition to 3 semester credit hours and 6 science offered in the core curriculum, degree programs EC 448 must include other 6 through 9 semester credit hours of math and another 6 through 9 semester credit hours of science. So that's the additional math and science for elementary and for mathematics, not applicable. No, I'm sorry. That's if you're doing a major there. Bill?
I guess my immediate reaction on the math and science is, now that we've made the adjustment to EC6, and I know in our situation when we had conversations about modifying our plan to move from EC4 to EC6, the guidance we were receiving was to increase the coursework in math, science, social studies. And so I think that's an important factor to keep in mind, that now we have moved to an EC6 configuration. I would still probably want to defer to the SBEC language over the more prescriptive hours in that approach. The other piece that I would comment on here is EC12, and I'm thinking special education. And the fact that, as I understand that a person who is certified in special education is also expected to pass a test in either EC4, EC6, some other 4.8, but in general education. And I would be concerned about the lack of knowledge of math of a special education teacher if we basically say they don't have to adhere to the same kind of standards that we would expect for an EC6 teacher, for example, if they were going to be qualified to teach EC6 also.
So
I agree with that philosophically. I think that EC12 can stand alone and doesn't need to have an EC6 generalist piggybacked with it. So it depends if you're doing EC12 special ed or EC12 supplementary. Okay.
But the EC12 special ed, they do have to have the content, though, to show that the knowledge of science and social studies.
Exactly.
So essentially, they will be taking that second exam on top of the EC12
And they need to be
special ed.
prepared to
yes.
pass.
So, Bob, Bill, what does that look like? What would the language look like if you implemented that?
Well, it looks like what we've done is accepted the 812 and the EC12, and I wouldn't feel the same way about EC12 art music that I feel about the special ed. So it may be that we be more specific in the language about the special education piece, and if in fact folks felt comfortable with moving to the SBEC language, which talks about the fact that the candidates just need to be prepared in these areas at whatever ends up being an acceptable level, and away from the prescriptive language of so many 6 to 9 credits or whatever in addition, I think we can craft it so that the special ed piece would be compatible with whatever we're saying about the EC6.
I was in both of these areas, reading and mathematics. I wasn't around when SBEC moved from the semester credit hour philosophy to the standard philosophy. I would expect there was a lot of discussion about moving away from rigor. Is that right? Was there? Did people say by moving away from a minimum requirement of semester credit hours to this more open standards approach, did SBEC have to basically defend not, you know what I'm saying, not lowering the standards? Or is that going to be an issue at all?
No, they bulldozed right through. That's what they wanted to do.
I think that was to accommodate more of the ACP programs, to make it a little general more and broader.
Sure.
That was the intent.
Sure. I'm sure that's true.
There was such a push to approve alternative programs that they just steamrollered over.
Okay.
And the rest of us kind of stuck with y'all's guidelines.
You had to.
Because we had to.
Is there a concern that if this agency steps away from a minimum semester credit hour requirement in mathematics and reading, mathematics, science, and reading, do we worry that people will say we're moving away from a quality program? I just want to put that on the table. Yes, sir?
I'm sorry about asking this question on one hand, but what's the purpose of the coordinating board requirements that we've identified here? What is it that why are they here? I guess, why do we have them? Or what are the purposes for the requirements?
I think going back to when the law changed and education degrees went away, there was a felt need for some consistency of degrees for teachers across the state, some set of minimum requirements. An academic degree was a huge issue, moving away from an education degree to an academic degree or interdisciplinary, and to maintain and to define and maintain the integrity of that degree as a degree equivalent to anybody who is not becoming a teacher. Does that make sense?
Well,
so that's my best answer.
The reason I'm asking is because I can understand, for example, the language related to core curriculum
Yes,
requirement that's broadly applicable, or the language and regulation related to interdisciplinary studies degrees, because that's a degree program. But if we're talking about ensuring, an equal standard and quality and all of that, then my question is, why wouldn't the SBEC regulation and guidelines be the guidelines and the regulation that would guide that process? I guess what I'm asking is, what is the coordinating board's interest, since SBEC is the regulatory agency that's designated with the authority to look at certification requirements and expectations and so forth? And related to that, since the coordinating board is taking a look at and is interested in defining these, and if in fact there is some compelling reason for the coordinating board to look at the nature of the programs beyond the broad curricular guidelines that would be applicable to any degree program, then one of the things that I'm wondering about is, to what extent does the coordinating board need to go beyond the legislative mandates that we have in terms of semester credit hours, maximum and minimums, and then just kind of leave it at that?
You stated the purpose of our meeting better than I did at the beginning. That's exactly it.
That's exactly the reason we're here.
So if in fact that's the case, then couldn't one of the recommendations the coordinating board could consider would be to reasonably and logically argue that although it has in the past been involved with this, that it recognizes that a lot of these rules basically should be more appropriately under the purview of SBEC rather than the coordinating board.
It certainly is a possible recommendation that could come out of this meeting.
If that happens, then that would suggest that the previous recommendations about going to more standards-based and also taking a look at whether or not programs are required to do math or science or combinations or reading and the level of their reading would be left up to the individual programs, provided they were meeting SBEC guidelines. And although there might result from that a little bit of variation, or maybe even a lot of variation across programs, ultimately we would be meeting the statutory requirements, we would be meeting the requirements relative to any degree program without regard to the nature of the program, and we would basically then be, and I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing, understand, but we would be basically then responsible to the guidelines that were promulgated by SBEC as a certification agency or licensing agency, much like other academic programs are designed around the requirements of their particular licensing agencies.
Understand what you're saying?
It also puts on a more equal basis with, I spent 10 years at private university, ACU, and of course we never worried about any of this stuff.
Right.
SBEC's all the people we listen to, so it seems to me like there's kind of inconsistent standards that different universities are expected to meet.
Right. Yes.
Okay, I'm just a little confused with the question, because I've asked myself that question, but it was my understanding that SBEC is really focused on the certification part of our students' education, but that the coordinating board has a broader picture and looks at the integrity of the bachelor's degree or the master's degree total, which encompasses also the certificate. So when I asked myself the question, I kind of answered it by saying, okay, well, SBEC, is checking that we're doing what we need for the certificate, but the coordinating board is checking to make sure that we have integrity for our bachelor's degrees and our master's degrees.
I think that is also accurate.
Well, but in other degree programs beyond the core curriculum, does the coordinating board prescribe content requirements? That would be my question.
Nope. This is the only program.
In any other program, whether if you decide to get a bachelor's degree in math or chemistry or history, coordinating board prescribes the core requirements, and that's all. These are the only degree programs in which the coordinating board is also prescribing or is prescribing beyond the core curricular requirements. So the question is whether or not that's something that is helpful, whether or not that's something that is reasonable from the perspective of the responsibility that we have to ASPEC as a credentialing agency, and lastly, whether or not that really facilitates from our perspective. I think those are the questions.
Agreed. Yes, ma'am.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Purple.
I think there's another side we need to look at. I think if you were around at the time when these laws were being passed by the legislature, I think the mood in the state at that time had to do with the concern as to the quality of the products of the students that we were putting out. And so when the degrees were taken from education and put into the discipline areas, I think that's where there was a tremendous push and move to ensure that the content was being covered. And I assume that that's why the coordinating board came back and established a certain number of semester credit hours. ASPEC and the credentialing piece has been, their main concern is, do the students have the competency to pass the tests and to be certified? And that is a different issue. And at the time, we didn't have the accountability for our degrees as much as we have today. So it is, I think, an opportune time to look at that. But at our institution, in trying to reduce our degree programs from 139 hours to 120 or 124, that was a major challenge at our institution. And there was a lot of things that programs said, well, we'll just integrate it into this, or we'll just put it in with this, and so forth. And at this point, because we've only been at it for a year, I couldn't tell you whether doing that to get to 120 hours or 124 hours has managed to keep the integrity of the degree. And I guess we won't know that until we start assessing, or we start measuring how well our students have completed the content. And I think, personally, I think that saying at a minimum you're going to have 6 hours of reading, at a minimum you're going to have 3 hours of math in addition to the regular math or science, gives us at least a place to start to say we at least know they have this much. So that's another point of view.
Let me comment, you do raise an issue going all the way back to the original bill and the issue of getting into the major, et cetera. Excuse me. I know what really led to the bill being passed in the first place was, and some of you will remember this, there had been a transcript study done that looked at education degrees or teacher preparation. They pulled a bunch of transcripts. And based on that transcript study, there was, right or wrong, an interpretation that teachers were taking just lots and lots of education courses. And the poster course that was raised over and over again during the legislative process was, guess what? Mathematics for elementary teachers. And they really, really, really focused on that course as, you can understand what the issues were. And I think when you put that at the front end of this bill and you look at all the interpretations that came after the bill and the going back to legislative intent, I think the reason they got down into and you're right, our responsibility is the integrity of the degree. You see that all through the language. It's the integrity of that major that was no longer an education major. And that's where all that came from. So, I mean, we're right. You're right. What needs to be here? What doesn't need to be here? How deep do we need to go into this degree versus other degrees? That's really what's on the table, and we want your input on what should be the same and what should be different, if anything, on this piece. So, for what it's worth, that's kind of. I want to keep us framed on, if this needs to be really different, we need to say it needs to be really different or not. And you've made a case for it not being totally different, and I think that's part of the discussion, because when you open the door, we all know what happens when we at the state don't say you have to do something. Then when you go back to your place, you've got a whole different conversation that you have to have on that opens up a lot of conversations.
What does the coordinating board say are the requirements for a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics?
That's a Kevin question, I think.
As opposed to a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics with 8 to 12 mathematics certification.
Well, I will read the relevant standard. I can find it on the webpage. Under curricular requirements, required courses are those taken by all students in the program. These courses shall meet all requirements for accreditation, licensure, or certification, and shall be consistent with similar programs in the state and nation. And there's some similar descriptions related to prescribed electives versus free electives. Well, free electives, obviously, a lot more general.
That's it?
You understand the question?
Yeah. I think one of the things we do have to think about that, you think about the year that we did away with education as a degree. It is still the perception of the public that education is a degree. Every time I talk to parents at orientation, I would say there is no such thing as a degree in education. You cannot read an article in the paper. You can read an article every day and they still refer to those students who get education degrees. It's taken us, we still haven't helped the public understand that students who get certified have an academic degree. If we start going backwards on requirements or reducing requirements, even though we do substitute standards, we are going to have a public perception problem. It's just something to think about as we look at this.
And ma'am, you're in the audience.
Susan, I'm Glenda Ballard from Texarkana, and a relative neophyte to this environment, so sometimes a fresh pair of eyes may look at it a lot correctly or incorrectly, but differently. If we took this idea to the extreme of not adhering necessarily to a coordinating board requirement for a baccalaureate degree and relied on standards-based models and SBEC guiding the teacher preparation programs, it appears to me, again, this is where the neophyte comes in, based upon my experience this past year of learning about EC4, EC6 standards, going through SBEC, et cetera, that there is a plethora of programs out there that are approved by SBEC, and the range of requirements, rigor, difficulty, et cetera, appear to me to be from A to Z.
Right.
So what would be the logical reason why we would assume that undergraduate baccalaureate degrees that relied solely on standards-based models would not follow that same path? And do we want that to happen? I don't know the answer to that. Again, I plead that neophyte, but to me that just seems to be a kind of an obvious if-then scenario.
Okay.
I think that's a major concern. I'm sitting here listening to all this. That's exactly what happened why ACP came through the door. We're now going to have ACP degrees if we open that window and start going standard-based rather than semester credit hours. I mean, we need to make sure that we don't replicate that type of situation. That is the ill of public schools today. Not enough secondary teachers in math and science, all because of a window we open sometime, letting our degrees and then coming through ACP. We don't want to find ourselves in that situation again. I don't think so. I think we need to start straddling back and start offering math education degrees.
Would you you would recommend, and say again what you just said, you would go back and...
I think we need to remain with the semester credit hours. I think standard base for SPEC worked. Like somebody said, like gangbusters, they pushed it through because they were not looking for university-based programs. They were looking for alternative certification programs. If we're going to open that window for undergraduate degrees, we're going to have the same situation happening. And you're going to have private degree granting institutions. You're going to have student service centers granting degrees. You're going to have public schools granting. I mean, I'm thinking worst case scenario here. But that may be something that we want to make sure that we keep a hold on this thing, and that is because it is university-based and university-centered, and that means that it's student credit hours centered. I don't know. I'm playing the devil's advocate here, Art.
I think that the advantage about keeping the coordinating board requirements is when we were working on our EC6, and we went through the formal process before you gave blanket approval. I think, I'm sorry, we got approval from the coordinating board before they gave the grandfather blanket approval that if you have an EC4, you're EC6. And I think that as a new dean, that helped me because what I'm concerned is that if we don't have some of these things specified, there are people in other departments, especially at the secondary level, and others, we know more about the content area. So if they had their way and there was no regulations, they would have really not listened. And sometimes when you have bodies that have to approve these, and it's a institutional board, just not the College of Ed, you're outnumbered, and I'm really concerned that in some ways I think this is a protection for people in the College of Ed, because if you don't put these, sometimes these are a protection to us to retain that dignity that we know what education is. And I think that in my university and perhaps in others, if these things are not there, well, this is what it says we are. The coordinating board says we will do that. We've honored the content courses. But if they had it their way, they could reduce education to 18 and not a lot less if they could. And I think that this it helps in many ways. And the other thing, Art, the reason I think that it should stay this way is because in the others, there's really not any cross-disciplinary discussion. A degree in architecture, a degree in engineering is a degree in engineering. Education is the only one. As a dean of the College of Ed, you have to act with all the majority of your different colleges. They really don't interact with one another. And we're the only ones that truly are interdisciplinary. And therefore, I think that because of that nature of that interdisciplinary, there should be some specifications, because I am concerned in some universities, the colleges of ed are going to lose out if people have that view of, well, I know what they need. And I think that I would prefer to leave it this way. And perhaps maybe that if people do not want to do it this way, in a worst case scenario or an optimal situation is to have C, that if you want to do your own, then that doesn't follow, if you want to follow these rules, but if for a dean doesn't, prefers another route, maybe somewhere else, that get approval by the coordinating board, and but I would rather stick with this.
It's kind of like an exception process.
An exception process, and if you want to go the other route, and you want to do that, you could do, but I'm afraid we're going to lose out.
Just one last point before lunch.
Yeah.
Jill?
Just a point of clarification, because I do agree with the protection that offers us as we have conversations back at our institution. So I think that's a good point. But the coordinating board remains semester credit hour oriented.
Sure.
For the degree.
Yes.
We're not talking about that. Is that right? We're really talking about item number 2 and 3.
That's right.
The rest of it is a given, just as it is for every other undergraduate degree. Here are the requirements. So many hours, so much core.
That's right.
Blah, blah, blah. So the integrity of the degree. So on the other hand, I'm torn because I like the simplicity of being able to separate in my mind degree and certification and the regulations related to those things. So I think we're not saying if we change 2 and 3 that we're throwing out the semester credit hour concept for a degree. We're saying just for those 2 items, and then I'd have to think about that long and hard before making a recommendation. Is that right?
And if you'll allow me one little footnote, is it struck me as Salvador was talking that what we have on this page is a combination of BSIS the degree, but also we have a combination of 812, EC12, which are not the same. They're not the degree. So in portions of it, as we look at it, if we want to just say that SBEC is concerned about the interdisciplinary degree, then there may be some more minor modifications that could be made to this document that would exclude the certification piece, which is part of the 812, EC12.
Sure. And remember, Bill, this was created back when the 87 standards were in place, and so everything that was in here was aligned with the 87 standards. And so that's why you see these references, I think, to back then there would have been, there were semester credit hours for all those things. And so this structure is still, it's been updated somewhat, as we move ahead. Like the 120 hours, we used to have 139 hours there. Well, we had to go in and put the 120 with the caveat that you could so this has been updated and tweaked, but not revisited. Lunch is now available. Do they have this?
No.
Okay.
We're going to pass it
Will
out.
you explain that?
Sure. So what we thought we'd do during lunch, in the interest of efficiency, is make it a working lunch and ask people to break up into small groups. We have one table here, second table there, with flip charts, a third table over there, and people can pull chairs around there. The room next door is also open and available, and we put another chart in there. Is that a flip chart? Is that right, Cheryl? And so 1, 2, 3, fourth group could go in there. I don't think we need to go around and make numbered table assignments. You just gravitate to wherever you want to be. And we have a list of questions that we've developed just to begin generating discussion. But please add to them. In fact, I'll just put these on the tables, and you grab one after you get your lunch. Lunch is over there. I guess we'll take an hour or so to do lunch and have these small group discussions, and then come back to the large group and share what you've talked about. Does that sound okay?
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's been very helpful so far.
Let's get back in the large group, if that's okay.
Never ends.
Am I not talking loud enough?
He's asking me about your choice.
Susan said, Kevin, could you get them started talking again? I said, I don't think I can stop them from talking.
It's a topic of interest.
Can't do it. That's exactly what you just bring it in. They talk.
We have them too, but we haven't adjusted them.
There, in that case.
When we're not asking about this, it's coming to budget, I'm just here for budget and finance committee for this. From 9 to 3, but I have it.
People who were at the meeting yesterday.
Those have used the flipboards as well. We'll keep those to enhance the notes that I'm taking. We'll ask, I think, if it's all right with you, Susan, we'll ask maybe a representative from each table to give us a summary of your discussion and what you've come up with to share with us.
How about this table over here?
We'll call that table 1.
The table 1. You're 1.
So the table number 1 is made up of James Sherrill from U of H Clear Lake, and we had Jacqueline Hawkins from U of H, Vera Hutchinson from U of H,
And Melissa Pearson.
From U of H, and then we had UT Dallas,
Sherry,
and myself, Hector Ochoa. We, in terms of... Dr. Ochoa, can you speak up? Yeah, I will. I'll try to do it better. My voice doesn't carry. Number 1, in respect to what practice should we continue to enhance in education preparation, we said that we believe that, as we discussed, that we should continue with the SEH requirements as outlined in the coordinating board rules. We think that's very important because other programs, other universities other than my own were saying that other programs would have just done away with some of that. We don't need reading if they're going to be a math, or they don't need reading, they're going to be social studies. So we pretty much were very consistent on that. We do believe that given the cost to do field-based programs, that we need to enhance the formula funding for field-based programs. That really needs some consideration given the time that it takes. So that was the other thing in terms of what bears do we need, one thing that we thought was the name of the degree, we went from one extreme to the other, and now we need to come back to the middle. And what we thought about was the name of the degree should be, if it's a secondary, the subject matter and education. So you have a BS in math and education. Because if you met the core standards for math, and there's not supposed to be any difference, you should be awarded that title, but yet you also have something more that they don't have, and it should really reflect the nature of the degree. If it is an elementary, it should be a Bachelor's of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies and Education. Because I think the public perception needs to know which ones, because we have requirements that we have to do that other folk, ACP doesn't have to do, we think it's very important that the state legislature, that every school should report what percentage of teachers have a degree in education and versus those that are alternative certified, because our public has no understanding of that difference. And they're not counted as a non-certified teacher because they have a probationary certificate for 3 years. The other thing that we felt was another barrier that we felt is that, that forum that you all had about the need to increase secondary teachers in math and sciences that was held here with the deans, I think, in the fall, that the problem that we face across our universities is that we don't get the teachers until they're juniors. And some really want to go into teaching, but the secondary content faculty, like in history, math, or science, or the advisors, convince students, don't go traditional teacher ed, go the ACP route. And we find that to be very critical, and we feel that's a conflict of interest if you're working for an institution of higher ed to be promoting. But this is a major factor why we believe that the professors in those content areas are more concerned about their own disciplines and really pushing people to not go into education. And we feel that that didn't happen, then those numbers wouldn't be as low as they are.
May I ask a question? Did you mean ACP to include post-BA, or are you making a distinction between a post-BA, say from, you're putting post-BA and ACP together? Okay.
And most of them even tell them to go somewhere else, you know. In terms of number 3, what program innovations would you recommend? We'd like for the coordinating board to consider Texas teacher residency program that's being considered in the stimulus package. Where at the graduate level, they get a graduate degree in C&I, and they work in schools for 1 year, but not as a teacher of record. The stimulus package, for those of us who are going to be going for that in a month, I think this would really help to produce a better quality teacher where they're in the schools for a whole year, and they get a master's degree in C&I, which would lead to certifications. And they would not be immediately thrown in from a for-profit ACP with so many hours of just being there. And we thought this would really help, like what's going on. We'd rather see this be done at the master's level as being done in the Boston Public Schools, the Chicago Public Schools, and that. The other thing that we thought was really critical is that you have the teacher aid exemption program where tuition is waived. And we'd like for the coordinating board to consider a tuition exemption program in high-need content areas, like you do for the TA in math, science, special ed, similar to the teacher aid exemption. But that if we need high-need areas and we need to put money there, because we believe we can produce a better teacher than if they're going to go ACP, and you can put years of service obligation to that for every year that you get tuition that you must work in a school doing that, and if you don't, then you're going to, provide with that contractual agreement. Because some deans would say that the Teach grant, or what is it? Yeah, it has a lot of issues. The other thing is that we felt it would be very important that all the stakeholders get together, an annual meeting of TEA, of the coordinating board, and the College of Ed deans to have a forum collaboratively. Because yesterday when we met, SPEC was not even included. And I think they would have benefited from that. And it would be very interesting for SPEC to be here. It's that we either meet with you or we meet with them.
Yeah.
And we feel that these are some critical issues that if we're all recommending this and we're all in agreement, that it would carry much more in a policy stake to the state legislature.
There used to be an annual meeting that was held around teacher ed doing this.
And I think in that meeting, it would be very helpful for our presidents to come so that they really understand the issues. We had that forum and very few presidents showed up.
That's right.
And I think that if the coordinating board says we want the presidents to come here, then that would help to do that. What other topics would you like to discuss at the state level? One thing that we'd really like to do is we feel that ACP is a significant threat to our student achievement and to teacher production. We would like to see the state legislature prescribe a cap of a certain percentage of ACP teachers that can be on a campus. And that cap maybe be no more than 20%. And that, if you're really looking at that, especially when you look at the number of people with probationary certificates that are out there, especially in low-income areas where they have trouble finding needs.
But when you're saying a campus, you mean the school district campus.
The school district, yeah. The school district cannot have, the school district cannot have more than a certain amount of ACP certified teachers at a given campus.
Got it. Now I understand now what you said.
Hector, what we also said is that to differentiate the school, the public school ACP program from the university, you may want to call it a post-bac.
Yeah, that's
so there's some differentiation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know that there's not.
Well, this should have been
the university and not. Yes.
Maybe this is what we're saying.
Or you can call it, say, alternative provider or something else, because ACP is too broad.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. That was what I was saying.
Jacqueline and I were rushing to
The other thing we said, as we talked about ACP programs, is that Mon is here from CREATE. If CREATE could look at the data and differentiate the university programs from the school district programs and see what the data shows in terms of 3 years out or more than 3 years out, I think that would support some type of finding. Positive for universities, we hope.
We also discussed if we had our dream, that we would, some people permit or require school districts to have differentiated pay scale for ACP alternative certified teachers. It's like an RN and LVN, they do the same thing, but they're different levels of training. We feel that we produce a stronger quality. And we said the coordinating board needs to provide better standards and evaluation procedures for distance education.
Okay.
So those are some issues that we discussed that we feel would have significant impacts, and the bottom line is to improve student learning outcomes.
Great. Well, thank you.
Did you guys we were very passionate. I mean, we were like, yes, go. That's what we thought. We think these are issues that really need to be discussed.
We ate and we're mean.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
We were very
I hope
passionate.
we can get a copy of all these ideas.
Heavens, well, that's one reason we
Absolutely.
ask you to write some stuff. Table 2, I guess, and you may need to move your board just a little bit. Thank you. That way they can see there.
I think Hector stole our thunder in some ways, because there were so many things that we also concurred with. So, for example, the practices we should continue, we agree also that we should continue with the coordinating board semester credit hour requirements for reading, math, and science. We thought that's a good thing. What barriers did we need to address? We believe that one of the barriers has to do with improving, enhancing the public's perception and image of teacher education, teacher preparation, the teaching profession as a whole. Would the people in this group raise your hand so we can know who all is talking? Okay, here's our group. Okay, and here too. Okay, we also talked about the barrier of unfunded mandates. How do we overcome that? Because even with the latest legislative bill, we have some unfunded mandates. And in our effort to improve the clinical experiences of our students, we have overwhelmed the public schools with a number of students and people we're sending out there. So that is something that we really need. We've done a much better job of improving their clinical experience, but we've also overwhelmed the public schools with all of that. Okay.
Did y'all have an answer for that problem?
Yeah.
Oh, no. We
Kids have issues.
Okay. The third question was what program innovations would you recommend? And we thought that we really needed to further explore and work on the blending of the content and pedagogy where appropriate. And that was a key phrase here. It's like it may not be appropriate in all cases, so we've got to be careful with that. We also talked about continuing to clarify statutes, some of what we're doing here today, continue to clarify the statute, the interpretations of those statutes by the coordinating board, continue the conversations between coordinating board, TA, and SBEC, and we also recommended that we ought to have a meeting where all of the players are at the table. Continue meetings with the deans of education and teacher preparation programs. And we also recommended teaching fellowships, so that those would be some of the things that we could also add, help support. In terms of what other topics would we like to discuss, ways to reduce bureaucracy. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do here in some ways, is to reduce the bureaucracy. To ways to enhance the image of the teaching profession, involve chancellors, presidents, vice presidents in the discussion of teacher preparation. Yesterday, again, at the Sid Richardson groups, we had very few of the people who should have been there. And it was a lot of the same of us who were, it's like speaking to the choir at some point. One of the recommendations that I made was that the chancellors and presidents meet regularly. They have scheduled meetings, or they all get together in Austin. I know our president gets together when the Board of Regents meets in Austin, and so forth. And that we ought to, instead of asking them to come to another meeting, to get on their agenda and to address the issues related to teacher preparation at those meetings. Otherwise, we may not get them to come to a meeting. Facilitate meetings with coordinating board staff, college deans, TA, and SBEC,
so that all of us are on the same page is what we talked about. Would anyone in that group like to add anything that I've left out, maybe?
One thing, we talked about speaking with one voice also, whether it's to the legislature or to various bodies, trying to develop a sense of cohesiveness and one voice. Not that we have to agree on everything, but have an agenda or some talking points that are really important to us that we share.
Could I add something? We've talked a lot about groups that need to get together, and communication is so very important. I will spend 2 days on the road for 1 day of meetings here, and I know others came from a long distance. The grants that are coming out from the USDOE are starting to use webinars, which is so very, very successful in my opinion. You get all the information, it's like you're there, but you didn't travel for hours and hours. I wonder if there's been any thought given to some of these meetings being held in a different way.
It could. Sure. Sure. Okay, anything else? Okay, what about the group back here? I guess that's table 3.
If the folks who participated in table 3 will raise their hands so we can blame.
Right folks, yeah.
And also, we really kind of didn't follow the outline. We captured some ideas that may supplement the work of the 2 groups that have reported before. We got started with a conversation about a disincentive for many students, and that is most of our programs, I guess, do not give more than 6 hours of credit for student teaching. And that poses some financial hardships for some students who can then only get prorated student financial aid. So this notation is just basically saying, is there a way that the coordinating board could play a role in recognizing student teaching as the equivalent of full-time enrollment that may or may not have an impact on eligibility for student aid? But we certainly don't want to put roadblocks and disincentives in place of students who are interested in becoming teachers when the non-post-bac ACP programs basically have this as one of the enticements to go that route. The second idea is similar to the notion, I think, that Group 1 had, and that is this looking at academic degrees for math and science teachers. Whatever we would call them, it's sort of saying this is a legitimate degree that would be reviewed in terms of its content and structure by the coordinating board. I thought the notion of tuition forgiveness or whatever you guys had was an excellent way to address the notion that we had here in those chronic shortage areas. How can we provide some kind of incentive, financial incentive for students to become teachers in those areas? And that seemed to me to be a beautiful way to address this notion. The fourth one we kind of stumbled into, and that is we were looking at a smooth transition from community colleges into 4-year programs so that students who begin in one institution and finish in another are not disadvantaged. And this is just recognizing that we've got the AAT regulations out there, the incentives, of course, for our colleagues in community colleges to have people complete their degrees from a funding perspective. Yet when you complete your degree, you may be taking some hours in addition to what you would need to take if you transferred before completing an AAT into a 4-year teacher education program. And related to that, I think this whole shift now to the AAT EC6 from the EC4 has got some smoothing that's going to have to be addressed. So that's what we were getting at with the fourth idea. And our last idea is getting into some of what's in new legislation, but the notion of we want to recognize the importance of mentor teachers. and finding some way to provide recognition, whether it be in terms of a stipend, college credit, or some other form of recognition for the work that they do is very important. And it kind of connects into this impact, maybe negative impact that we may be having heavily clinically based programs, the impact of that on the school districts, and in particular on the teachers who work with our candidates. And also then recognizing that, in fact, to do some of this induction that's expected and the data keeping requirements on our graduates that is now going to be expected of us, there's a cost associated with that. And I don't know whether it's in funding formula or whatever, that can be helped. So those were key ideas, and I would ask members of the group if they had anything that they wanted to add or elaborate or other ideas.
Just to say that this last idea about incentives for mentors is partially in the climate of working with districts that are also involved with ACP programs that are providing monetary compensation for mentors, while we are not, due to what I think is a state law. So.
One of the notions there is if there's a limited pool of good mentor teachers and an ACP is willing to offer 500, 1,000, whatever they offer, and a university program is not offering anything, the teacher may go with the financial.
Can I interject, as we talk about tuition exemptions, tuition waivers, that we make sure that we qualify that? I just went through a session where it was unqualified, and we estimated it would cost us $750,000 a year because it was for all classes that were taken by a certain major in their field. So I know our discussion was that we might provide tuition waiver for a graduate class, or and of course we know that the paraprofessional exemption is for a set number of hours. So I'd hate for the results of this meeting to be interpreted that we want to educate people for free, because we'd have to close our doors. We can't do that. And what came out of the last session was unfunded. It's just you will educate these people, you will not charge them tuition and lab fees. So we need to qualify that.
But I think we would tell me if we would be in agreement. We're looking for some kind of incentive to help candidates be attracted into these chronic shortage areas.
On your community college one, I don't know if others are doing this or not, but we're going to pilot in the fall enhanced 2+2 agreement with our local community college, and we're going to work with them so that students, whenever they transfer, we mutually exchange records so that there's a retro giving of the degree in the fall. So I think some of us try to do that so that it's a win-win situation for them and for us.
Yeah.
Interactive. Right.
We're hearing more of that.
Anything else from our group?
Thank you. Would someone represent the group in the fourth table? I noticed they didn't like write things down, but if there'd be a spokesperson.
I was told to tell the group, the larger group, that all of the ideas that came around, we thought of them and we just didn't write them down.
Understood.
There were two things. One was, and we actually did, the two things actually that we spent the most time talking about. One had to do with the idea of looking at a way of secondary teaching degree programs, essentially. The interdisciplinary studies degree would still be the degree for the elementary track folks, but the secondary folks would be through a secondary teaching degree. We didn't elaborate on that, just an idea to begin talking about. The second idea that actually took the majority of our time dealt with quality assessment related to degree programs that were 100% online, and the role that the coordinating board might play in monitoring quality and establishing some criteria for those things. And the rationale that we offered had to do with the fact that these programs have the potential to adversely impact our programs because the public's not likely to distinguish a master's degree awardee from a traditional program and a master's degree awardee from a distance learning program. That sounds like it presupposes a master's degree program. Folks are going to be less skilled at the end of their degree program. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case, provided there are the necessary and sufficient safeguards to ensure quality. And that was, as I said, the thing that really consumed the majority of our time.
Anything else to add?
Oh, and besides thinking of all of the other ideas as well, we thought of them first.
Zipped right by those. I am appreciative of all the work that you've done and all the ideas that you've given us that we can work with. And we'll have to digest and think through and do some prioritization there. Are there, I've heard in here, actually we were going to pose to you, are there, we had this meeting around this particular topic, and the last two topics are really kind of pushed together, and we've kind of covered them. Do you think that this type of meeting is useful, distance or not? And if so, what kinds of other either follow-up activities related more specifically to this that we would work out, or are there other areas that you would like to have discussion around, in the future? The commissioner had invited deans to come and visit with him in December. I think it was the 17th of December. And we kind of foreshadowed this change in rule at the very end of that meeting and said, this is what we're looking at. We need to alert you to this. And so this is this meeting followed up on that and fleshed that out somewhat. We're open to, number one, facilitating meetings like this. And SBEC knew of the meeting, was invited. It wasn't something that I made the big point to say, you must be here. But we do communicate. Trust me, we do communicate pretty often, and we do answer questions back and forth. This just wasn't something that I guess they felt they needed to be at, and I'm sure they're pretty busy right now. So we can certainly make an a point to say this. May we do a joint sponsorship? That means somebody shows up, whether it's here or there, doesn't matter. So that's not an issue with us. We work with them well, I think. So that's kind of where we are. So last points here. Are there things you want to kind of really emphasize out of the group comments we just made, and give us that emphasis? I don't have a sense of the only groups that dealt with the questions we had about the reading requirements and the science math requirements were these groups over here. So we may want to resurface that and see if we get a consensus to leave it as it is, or if we don't have a consensus, if we're still kind of thinking about it, that's fine. But these two groups put that on their chart and the others didn't, and that's fine. And then if there are other things you want us to highlight out of here, fine. But then we'll move into, are there topics you would like to have us follow up with other meetings? Maybe once or twice a year seems reasonable to me. I don't know that you want to get with us more than that. Yes?
I just wanted to ask a question. Of all of the suggestions that you received, aside from the reading and math science requirements, what are the things, it would be helpful if you could tell us, what are the things you feel like that are in the purview of coordinating board, things that you could actually work on, and things that you can see already that you might endorse, but they're outside the purview of coordinating board action?
And I'd like to be able to answer that thoughtfully. And right now, I've actually heard so much and seen so much that, what we could do is kind of go back and skim through them, if you'd like to do that, because there's too much. I don't remember them all. We could kind of flip through the pages and look at them, if you want to do that. Jill?
Just a suggestion, and again, it's probably my agenda, but it's the secondary education piece.
Right.
To me, is timely because of what the commissioner said about you need to. We charge you with coming up with some creative ideas for addressing that, and for us to be proactive about developing those ideas. And it also surfaced several times in terms of the type of degree that might be, or the tuition reimbursement kinds of efforts. And so maybe if we used that as a focus and what kinds of strategies in terms of degrees and enticements and whatever, and actually have a proposal for the commissioner.
Sure.
If if you think that's still on his radar.
I do, and I think the math science focus as a needs issue is on target. I think talking about ways to maybe structure something is certainly doable. The tuition reimbursement piece, I mean, we're not against carrying it forward. I don't know how that gets mechanically done.
I think a lot of these things, what we could do is put all of these recommendations in a matrix and then identify what agency or what group would be the responsible party. The coordinating board, obviously, any recommendations related to formula funding, we would submit that as staff to Planning and Accountability, which is another division in this building that works with the formula advisory committees that make recommendations to the legislature. So there are some processes in-house for certain things that you've described, and then there are things that are outside of the purview of the coordinating board. But it would be good for us to know what those are, and we'll be happy to work on that and send that out to you after this meeting. And then we can, I really like your suggestion about possibly making this a plan to submit to the commissioner.
I agree. And I agree with Kevin. There's so much here. I can't really process it well, and I'm afraid we would miss something or mislead you, and we really need to think it through.
And some of the issues are being dealt with other advisory committees. This is not an formal advisory committee, but other formal advisory committees. The issue of what constitutes a fully online program and other issues related to that. Of course, the issue of name of degree, I mean, that's the coordinating board's purview. But anyway, let us digest this, as Susan has suggested, and send it back to you in a format that that identifies who we think the main players are for each of those items.
That makes some sense. We'll give you some guidance on how to get things back to us. Timeline, I think most of the things we've talked about are, I mean, they're things we can start with. We can start the process. This is not a turn the switch off and on kind of thing. I think that I do want to come back to, and I'll get a little kind of more thought consensus on the two groups over here who really are supporting keep maintaining the reading and the mathematics science semester credit hour requirements that are board policy interpretation. They were pretty consistent in saying that on this side of the table. And I want to make sure that others are either really comfortable if that goes forward, or because the window is not always going to be closed, but this is an opportune moment because of the board action, we think, in July that says we're moving in another direction. And so if we wanted to start that conversation, I think we would at least alert them that we might be looking at something different. We don't know what it is. But if we're not looking at something different, then we can kind of be silent and just let them roll with their rule change in Chapter 5. Which doesn't deal with this. So a little more conversation on those specific points, I think, would be helpful. Bill?
I would, as I've stated before, I would prefer, I think, to look at going the performance standards route that SBEC has. But if that's not the direction that is taken, I would suggest that we take a look at focusing on the degree, which it will be an EC6 degree.
Yes.
In which case, under the reading requirements, that statement about 3 semester hours of reading for 812 and EC12 programs may not be appropriate because those programs are not part of this degree that would be looked at by the coordinating board. And similarly, for Roman numeral 3, math and science, I would suggest that we take a look at the language there, recognizing we're now talking EC6. We may feel comfortable with 6 to 9 hours. That may be fine. Or we may want to say a minimum of 9 hours and more. I don't know. Because we're now talking about adding 5th and 6th grade preparation to that.
How are most of you handling the addition of, say, the 5th and 6th grade texts for mathematics or science in your programs?
We had another math course.
We did too.
And we revised our reading courses to incorporate.
Okay.
Barry, did you say you have a math course?
We added another math course.
Added?
Add additional math courses for 5th and 6th.
Okay.
That's in your math, through your
Yes, through the math
department. Math department.
What'd you add?
Well, we had 2 math classes in the math department, Math Concepts 1 and Math Concepts 2 for EC 4. So we had a third one called Math Concepts 3. So we have 9 hours.
Yeah. What's in there, though?
It covers the teachers that
Algebra?
the teachers that are in 5th and 6th grade.
So it's just for education people?
Right, it's for education people.
No.
That's not part
Surely
of the
somebody
major.
else takes that
We'll
course.
let somebody else take it. It's to say, maybe education people that ask to take it. But if someone else asks to take it, we let them take it too.
Yeah, understood.
You know, turn the microphones off for a second.
Yeah. Okay, so there's been at least one suggestion that instead of 6 through 9, it actually become 9. Any other votes for that?
I think if you want to exceed the
You're having
minimum,
to go
that's
up.
a program thing.
You can, yes.
And I think having the minimum, I'm one of the ones who likes having the minimum. I think quite a few of us exceed the minimum, but then there we're looking at, can we do it with the minimum or do we need more? Those who think they can do it with the minimum, then have that as a minimum.
Okay, other comments on going to 9 hours instead of 6 to 9?
It depends, for me, if we're, back to what Bill was saying, and trying to, again, reconcile what makes sense conceptually, but then how does that happen in implementation? If we are talking about this as degree requirements, thus 8 through 12 and all level, if we're setting those aside, then my big concern for staying with semester credit hours is gone, because that's over here in this pile. It's the reading for the 8 through 12 folks that, we talked about. That would be at my campus, that would be the leverage that we would be able to use to keep that in, and say, but the state is requiring that you continue those 3 hours. But if that's out, then that kind of changes my perspective. Is that making sense?
Yeah,
I didn't
get
say
first.
Okay, say that again, Jill, because I'm not following you. On the reading piece.
What I heard Bill saying is that if this is if this is focused on the degree, the interdisciplinary studies degree, and if we are removing the requirements, the information related to 8 through 12, and some of those pieces out of this document, then we might be removing under reading and 3 semester credit hours of similar coursework for 8 through 12, which is reading in the content area for most of us.
Where did it come that this was only focused on the interdisciplinary?
Yeah, that's what I
said. If.
Right.
But it isn't, is it? That was
It's
my
really
question.
not. I mean, I
Okay.
think this covers both the academic major and the interdisciplinary academic major.
Exactly.
Okay. Right.
See, and so that's where I was having trouble with, because that academic major will cover your upper grades 8 through 12.
Okay.
And we have traditionally required 3 semester credit hours of reading in the content area, basically, for the secondary teacher. See, I wasn't understanding we were taking that out. That's where I was getting a little confused, Bill, on what you were saying.
I was seeing 3 options, okay?
Yeah.
One option, which I feel comfortable with, is basically to defer to the SBEC
Sure.
guidelines
Sure.
for Roman numerals 2 and 3.
Right.
A second option would be to leave it as it is.
Uh-huh.
And the third option is to basically look at the coordinating board requirements, really only applying to the Bachelor of Interdisciplinary Science.
Yeah, got it.
SBEC would stay the same. So that in the case of 812 in reading, there would still be the requirement, reading content in order to meet certification standards, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But it would not be prescribed as 3-semester credit.
I see what you're saying. I see what, thank you. It's taken me this long to get to where you were. That's an interesting option, which I just have to think about. And that would, I believe, the result of what you just said is that for a person getting a major in history, an academic major in history, including the coursework required to be a certified teacher, this would essentially not apply really at all. Yes. Right? Because
The
degree piece.
The right-hand column, the SBEC guidelines would apply,
yep.
but yes,
Yep,
the
yep,
coordinating board requirements would not apply.
Okay.
And it would be the same way in math and science for the 812 and EC12.
But the reading.
What about now I understand what you're doing about the 812. Now, what about the EC12 programs?
The one for
that
special ed I would like to
keep. Okay. Okay.
But I don't think it makes a lot of, I think that's the art, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Spanish is now EC12.
It will be, yes.
Music,
Yep.
health and physical education.
So that's what, okay. Okay.
And EC12 in Spanish doesn't
Okay.
need to.
Okay. I have to think it through. Yep. I'm not ready to jump one way or the other, yes.
I wanted to ask a question. For those people that are advocating, and I'm not arguing against it, I just don't understand, advocating retaining coordinating board rules related to reading and math and science, could I have somebody explain the rationale for that? Explain to me why that's a good idea.
I don't know if it's a good idea. I can tell you why I'm for it. And that is the fact that when I was dealing with all the content areas, as far as they're concerned, there should be no reading at all in their 8 to 12 program. None, zero. And what I was able to do is say, hold it. Here's what the coordinating board says. We have to have this reading across the content areas. And once I said that, the argument disappeared.
Math and science?
Math, science, history, language arts, all of them.
At my institution, if this were not there, the social studies people would not require reading, the math and science would not require reading.
Not at all.
Not at all.
How would you meet
What
that?
about item 3? That's the question. So the third one is the math and science requirement.
I'm sorry?
So
Yeah.
you're talking about requiring reading.
And math and science.
So the math and science requirement is there because if somebody was getting a major in history, for example, the history folks would say, no, we don't want to offer math, we don't want these people taking additional math and science?
Yes. That's what they say now.
Yes,
And
what they say.
the only
It's
way
true.
we can say you will is because it's in here.
Math and science doesn't apply to secondary.
Right, it's just for the IAM anyway.
No, not the secondary, no.
We're talking about
Just-
secondary, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay, no. The math and science.
Math and
doesn't.
science doesn't apply to secondary.
So really, the issue's the reading.
Reading,
The
the
reading,
secondary.
yeah.
Not the
Not the math
Now,
and science, yeah.
the SBEC requirement for to cover reading would still be there for even the secondary program, correct?
Yeah, but don't make the logical jump that it says all degree programs must include a sufficient amount of reading.
Yeah.
What's
Okay.
That
sufficient
somebody
amount?
mathematics say, oh, well, they've got a sufficient amount, they can read.
Yeah.
Okay, I just,
read.
That's right. That's sufficient. That's sufficient amount.
right, I just wanted to be sure that I was clear that they understood.
And we talked about that in
And
our
our-
group as well, because the term sufficient reading is not clear nor definitive.
Well,
I think that it has to be, the content of reading needs to be, I think, in place in a 3-hour course, because what happens is the reading in the content area covers a lot of content that teachers are not going to think about if they are science or social studies and math. They will just overlook it. And that component is important to have in that preparation sequence of courses, so there will be knowledgeable about striving readers and other kinds of readers that might be needing special scaffolding. And we see a lot of that need currently in our schools. So I think it would be it would be just not a good idea to remove that. I think a lot of students will have difficulties trying to make progress.
Okay. Yes.
I also think that if anybody had a post-approval visit since January with the new rules that were added in the 17 content areas that they're prescribing under SBEC, that they're going to want to see that in the syllabi. And it went into effect by the time we got the regs in late January and going through approval in early April. The issue SBEC is pushing is that reading, is not only the course that you teach in reading, but reading should be taught in everything, and I think that if you don't include that and you look at some other disciplines at our respective institutions using the power play, if you don't have this, you're going to have a hard time getting post-approval by TEA. And if you think you can do it, then you're going to be, I'd like to see how you can do it. I think we put ourselves at risk by not having this at all levels, and especially after the new 17 curriculum areas. In addition to all the standards, we're going to have to embed on our syllabi those 17 curriculum areas, and they're going to be doing desk audits to do that as well. And that's going to be very difficult if we take out, I think this will help us to do that in the coordinating boards.
I guess the challenge that I have is that the current regulation specifies a minimum number of semester credit hours that are required, but it doesn't specify anything more than that. And that presupposes that these semester credit hours are going to be relevant, or that we, from an education perspective, are going to be able to influence them in any significant way. If the argument is we need them there so that we can have them because folks won't listen to us, then my question is, how well do they listen to you in terms of your arguments with regard to what needs to be included in these courses? My second question has to do with clarifying that we're potentially talking about two different things. We're talking about secondary certifications, and then we're talking about elementary certifications.
Right.
The question is, to what extent are these requirements or guidelines required or important to have with regard to one or the other of those certification levels? And then finally, my third place would be that certification guidelines should be strong enough to influence what's happening on your campus. If you go back and you say, we're not going to recommend people for certification in these areas because they're not likely to be successful, or even better, they start failing the tests, then it suggests that folks are going to listen to you, because I would bet that education undergraduates are a significant proportion of your undergraduate enrollment. And finally, if they don't start failing the test in significant numbers, then that suggests that the requirements were not really necessary to begin with. So I'm more comfortable with making an argument that we have to have requirements that ensure quality or that ensure teacher effectiveness or ensure something related to what we're about than making an argument that we have to have the requirements, because if we don't, essentially we won't be able to influence the discourse and the decision making on our campus.
I think Glenda had her hand up, and then over here.
Susan, I'm not sure, with regard to the math and science on the requirement 3, we just pared our EC to 6 down to 124 hours, and so I worked very diligently with my faculty on doing that. And we are an upper division school only right at the moment, so all of our feed-ins are from the community colleges. And one of the advantages of having those additional hours of math and science sort of curtails some of the extraneous hours that we might get in from institutions. And I'm not disparaging community colleges. I'm a graduate of one and worked there for many years. But reality being what it is, that sort of secures that these students know they must have more than just the requisite core curriculum, math and science, in order to be successful in a teacher preparation program once they get to us. And given that our 124 degree hour program has potentially 70 hours of lower division and only 54 upper division, that gives me cause for concern that we've pared it down as narrowly as we can, and every course in there addresses those standards to some degree. So,
okay, thanks.
Yes, if we believe in standards and outcomes, then we should make our statements in standards and outcomes, not by courses.
Okay. I just ask a question. If, in fact, this requirement were not in place for elementary teachers, this additional math, science requirement, how many of your programs would not have these math and science courses?
We probably still have them. The only advantage to having them is that it saves another argument. For instance, when we were revising our degree plans, EC through 6, the first hurdle we got over was it a required course? Is it a TICA course, for instance, or is it required by someone else? If so, then there's no argument. It stays in there.
Right.
If it wasn't, then we had to argue. And so you've got all the competing forces. You've got all the different departments arguing to keep their courses in there.
Sure.
And those that were protected by this, they stay in there. Now, it could be that, I think at least 6 to 9 hours is necessary in order to do well on the test.
Is that what we agree
Right.
with?
And I think that's correct. And I would have pushed for that. It just would mean that I would have to do an extra argument to convince everybody else not to cut that course to add one of their courses back in.
Okay.
So it just makes my job easier, I guess.
Right. 6 to 9 hours. I mean, one of the issues is I think we probably wouldn't cut any math or science back for elementary teachers because that's obviously one of the areas that we get the most concern.
We would not be able to cover enough of the content that needs to be covered within our little 18 hours without going outside.
Right. John?
I think, I don't know, but most people probably have a Bachelor of Science degree. And so really on number 3, what we're talking about is just the mathematics, because it already requires the science at the level at which this recommends here for the Bachelor of Science degree. And so what we're talking about is the additional math course beyond what's required in the core.
Right. Okay. That is a good point. So you're talking about we're talking about one reading course and one math course, maybe.
Math courses.
Well, 2 for elementary, but
right.
Jill had raised the issue of the reading course at the secondary level, which was the one reading course. Probably none of us would go below 2 reading courses at elementary. And it's hard to slice one course much smaller in reading at secondary level. I guess you could do 1 hour of reading, but So, all right. I don't know that I have a great consensus here. There's some pretty strong support for keeping it as is virtually. And I don't hear anybody saying they can't live with it as is. I mean, that's the other way to go about it. I hear some support for it'd be nice to free it up, and yes, we would like to free it up. And is that a relative kind of statement of where most of us are? All right. Any other comment? I thought I saw a hand, but maybe not. All right. Well, I felt like that just needed a little bit more discussion. It's such an important part and point, and this is a place where it's important to get this on the table now. It's a timely piece. All right. Anything else you want to add about any of the other pieces that other groups brought up that you either hadn't thought of, you want to support, your group didn't think about, but more, that's a good idea? Jill?
This is, again, more directed towards SBEC, but I just wanted, the discussion reminded me of it when we would talk about ACPs, and then some of us would say, wait, don't include the university-based ACPs in that. Not that we disagree with what you're saying. And so for another discussion another time, I'd still like to talk about the definition for SBEC of ACP, and I'm proposing something like university-based programs, which are more similar, whether they're traditional or ACP, versus alternative providers, which are not academic-based, semester credit hour, whatever. So that That's an agenda that I have.
I think that we were thinking of it from the perspective of the upload to the Texas exam, because the codes differentiate the program prep. So whether it's university prep traditional or university prep ECP, or whether it's so when you upload, I'm sorry, I'm in the spreadsheet.
I hear what you're saying.
When you upload, there's a code.
There's just such confusion.
We would never use the codes they do.
I agree. Yeah, that makes sense. There's just such confusion in all different kinds of forums in which we're talking about alternative certification that I think it might be time to look at what's happened in the past 10 years and how we might define it differently. So.
I always try to, when I don't have good data because you can't cut the data the way we want it. But when we talk about programs, I always talk about university-based baccalaureate and university-based post-bac. And then there are university-based ACPs. So and I don't know how many universities have both. I just don't have I don't have a way to get to that number. Almost all the universities have a post-bac program that I'm aware of. There are some I know that have what they call ACPs, and I don't know if how much they're running two really different programs, ACP and post-bac. Does that make sense? You could, certainly could, but we just don't have a handle on that.
That might be a good topic for conversation with SBEC too, in terms of how things are coded, how things are defined, because it's different in different settings, and it's confusing. And so you might hear, well, universities aren't preparing any math and science teachers, and we're kind of like Susan in our ACP. We are.
Yes.
Yes. So if you're not counting that.
Yes. Or it doesn't get counted when somebody reports it.
Right.
And related to that, it would be helpful to me to understand the coordinating board's role in a university-based post-bac program, which is not a degree, and versus its role, let's say, in a university-based ACP program vis-a-vis SBEC's oversight of both of those kind of things. Just where do the two agencies fit together in those kind of configurations?
In reality, if you look at the chart we put together and the forms that we have only a post-bac form on the web. These guidelines still apply to the post-bac program. If you want to dig through this notebook that I used to pull the chart from, then you'll see that the guidelines for the post-bac were really early on to be, you're just supposed to give them the education component, the 18 to 24 hours. And when you look at the post-bac form, usually on the column that talks about content, you'll put something like, if they pass the exam, there's no content required. Or if they can't pass the exam, we'll have them take a course, geography or something. Then you have the education component. And that's really the way the policy was designed for the post-bac part.
Is this the only such program that SBEC, that the coordinating board has oversight of, the only post-bac type program?
You mean a certificate program? You mean a certificate program?
Yeah, I guess so, but
it's the only one
in
that
a different way that we define in our institution.
Yeah,
it's the only one that institutions submit a proposal on or related to. Every other certificate program, whether it be undergraduate or graduate level or post-bac, institutions notify us of them and we put them in the inventory.
And so a question that I would ask, is that something worth taking a look?
Sure.
It's an outlier, it seems to me.
That's on the table.
Absolutely.
And we've got the two agencies involved, and if we could simplify that, that would be something that might be desirable.
That's just the form that we have on.
If the board, approves the rule changes that we proposed in July, it will be simplified. Because what I didn't give you a summary on was that certificate programs as well are being proposed to be dealt with in the same way as baccalaureate programs and master's programs. So yes, no more forms.
Which leads to
I'll take applause.
Yeah. Hey, we get that together. We've been dancing, kicking high steps on this one. We look at the Rockettes. that raises that whole issue of the ACP piece, because you've been submitting the ACP on the post-bac form. If you know what I'm saying, it's just like I've been scratching my head saying, okay, I don't know what these animals are, because under an ACP program, I think people are in fact treating it more like an old efficiency plan. Does anybody know what that was? Because in the olden days, you might add some course hours, or you'd say we've got this specific focus over here, and so on that post-bac form, because we're an ACP program and not a post-bac program, we're going to have a couple of hours over here, and that's your program, and that's your alternative, and then your interns, they're doing an intern instead of a student teaching experience. And that's the way it's been explained to me. And I thought, well, that's just fascinating. So, y'all think that we know what's going on and that we have a tight rein on this. Well, wrong. So, interesting. So, maybe we can get out of that hole.
SBEC doesn't know the difference between ACP or post-bac.
Right. Well, that's because
there is no real defined.
There used to be a post-bac rule. There used to be an ACP rule. And there used to be a baccalaureate rule, and they pushed them all together, and in some ways that works, in some ways it doesn't work.
And so maybe we don't need to differentiate between those two anymore, because
except that we're reporting them differently, and that's the problem. Unless you have clear definitions so that everybody's using the same definition on what you're reporting. That's my concern. But the definitions are not nailed. The definitions were nailed, and we were all clear about what it was.
Susan, there was something sent forward, I think through TACTI, about definitions, clarifying the definitions between those two. I don't know where that...
It went to Karen.
Karen Lunan.
Yeah, Karen Lunan has them. She had asked
I don't know if you all have seen that.
I haven't seen that. That we'd be happy to have a copy and follow up or whatever.
So my understanding is with this new approval process, if we wanted to start a master's, we have a master reading certificate, but now we want to do a master's math. We don't have to go through you and do the paperwork. Is that what I'm hearing?
You'll submit.
This is important.
Why don't you say it again?
Yeah.
We have a master's reading teaching program, which includes a certificate, but we desperately, one thing I've realized as a UDean is to do the master's math. So before we had to do all these forms and get approval, my question is, do we do those forms, or what do we do to get it? Is it just an automatic approval, and then we then submit the matrices because we haven't had it before to SBEC, or what do we do for you to start a new, like a master science or master teacher?
Talk in the microphone.
Oh, master science or master reading teacher. We don't have that. That's my question. I just want to make sure that I'm following right steps.
Right. If the board approves the rule changes, the program would be automatically approved if it met those criteria that I outlined in the beginning of the meeting, which was that your institution, your Board of Regents has approved it, that the institution certifies adequacy of funding to support the program, that it would come in under $2 million for the first 5 years of the program, that it's non-engineering, obviously, non-doctoral, that kind of thing.
And if it's leading to, say, a Master of Mathematics teaching certificate, you would have in the past, probably submitted a request. That you don't do that to us, right? SBEC still has all of its matrix requirements.
Yeah, but
you don't get anything from us.
Do we have to be sure that we have authority to offer that degree?
That's a good question. Related to the proposed rules on program approval, we've also proposed some changes in preliminary authority requests, and I'm not sure if everyone knows what that means. It's the first step in the two-step process for program approval. And just quickly to outline the rules related to that, we're proposing that no preliminary authority would be required of universities and health-related institutions for non-doctoral, non-engineering programs.
or non-doctoral. So that's a big change.
It's
a
huge.
major change.
I'm telling you,
That's
it is
huge. So no more proposals to the coordinating board if this were all approved.
That's right. And what your institution requires, what your Board of Regents requires, is going to be up to them.
So it's got to be, so whatever the institution requires, or the Board of Regents. Okay.
Right.
And then you just add it to our inventory. It
That's
has to be on our inventory, doesn't it?
Right. Well, so the preliminary authority, the table of programs, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. That's the table of programs, if the board approves the changes, will indicate authority in doctoral level authority in various disciplines. It would be a vertical line, because the doctoral level is in a column, and then one horizontal line related to engineering, CIP code 14. That's it.
That's it.
Everything else will be wiped out.
That's a major change.
See, this is good
That's
news.
a major change.
Claps for Kevin.
Yeah.
It's such good news, we can't understand it.
I understand that. So then basically, I'm going to have to do all that.
See, that's why what we're talking about is here is you're going to live, you're going to say, yes, I understand what we're doing here. And yes, I'm sure that if anybody comes and asks, how many education, do you have 30 hours of education, you're going to know what that means. You're going to say, no, I don't.
See, for me, I just thought I didn't worry about the preliminary authority because we do have preliminary authority to offer anything in education,
and most people do.
And most people do. But in master's degree, we're thinking about another master's degree, and we got to go to the coordinating board. Well, if we have this, it takes away preliminary authority. You can just do it, and as long as you can meet these requirements. Wow.
So the process ought to be much shorter in terms of getting things done.
That's why I call it the proposed streamlined process.
Yes.
Linda has a comment.
To answer his question about the MMT, the MRT, the MS, the MTT, and Master of Science, all of those are certifications. They're not degree programs.
Yeah.
So
But it's a master's. It's a master's program. If you got that master's program, you're going to SBEC for that.
Yeah.
I should have said, well, if you're going for a bachelor's thing, I just used the example he gave to say you're not coming back to me, to us, for paperwork.
But if we get a degree, a master's, they want the master's degree, then if we have preliminary, we don't need it anymore.
Right, that's right.
We just say, we write you a letter and we met these conditions, and then
There'll be some process.
there'll be a form.
We'll probably have a one-page form where you check everything off, and then the chief academic officer signs at the end.
And the teacher ed piece is one of the checkoffs.
Right.
That'll be on that form.
Who signs off?
The teacher ed part, you're going to do a secondary math teacher certification program. Let's pretend you didn't have one. And so when you fill out that form that you send in over here, one of the checkoffs, if it's a teacher certification program, is yes, we're going to meet the standards that we're agreeing to live with.
Now, I know you have, like for the undergraduate educator prep, are there specific criteria for a master's degree in some of these areas, or do you just say, is it 36 hours? Is it specified less detailed?
The
master's degree, like the master's reading teacher or the master.
Right. The standards for a bachelor's and master's program, they actually identify the minimum number of semester credit hours needed in whatever level of a program. Right.
And then we just meet that, and then we have to meet how it meets at the same time as we're developing the minimum number of hours, we need to also coordinate to fit the standards for SBEC as we do the matrices.
Right.
This is just a curiosity question. For-profit institutions, universities that come into Texas, how does the coordinating board work with them to approve them for programs within Texas? Is that going to be the same kind of thing? Once they're recognized, then they can add anything they want?
I don't know the process very, very well, but I know that for new institutions coming into Texas from out of state or for-profits coming in for the first time, they do have to gain, and I may get the name wrong, either the certificate of authority or certificate of authorization to have a presence in Texas. And there's an application form that they fill out, and it details the level of the programs. Melinda, you know better than I do. You want to come up here?
Oh.
You've worked with them longer. She can correct anything I've just said.
Or add to the confusion.
Well,
There you go.
If we want to start the Masters of Science, if it doesn't cost.
y'all, this is Linda McDonough, who works with us.
For instance.
Well, the process for the out-of-state or private institutions that are coming into Texas has changed a little bit, like a lot of things have changed over the past year or so. If a new institution is coming in that wants to set up shop in Texas, and that institution isn't accredited by one of the, I think we have 11 recognized accreditors now, that's when the institution goes through the application process and gets a certificate of authority to grant degrees in Texas. If an institution comes in that is accredited by one of our 11 recognized accreditors, or 12, I can't remember how many there are, that institution can come in, they let us know where they're going to set up, but then they're on their own. We turned that part of our job back over to the accrediting agencies, and we're letting the accrediting agencies police these programs. So basically, if you're accredited, you want to come in, you want to start a teacher, teacher ed program, history program, any program, you can do that as long as your accrediting agency says you can offer that degree.
And they'll go to SBEC for their teacher ed program. Yeah, they'd have to.
Yeah, just like they have to go through the Board of Nursing when they offer nursing programs.
Same thing. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Susan?
Yes.
Can I take us back to this document? We talked about lots of ideas, and one of them that occurred to me that we may have lost is the special ed EC12. And what I thought, if people feel supportive of, is that under Roman numeral 3, math and science requirements, number 1, what we may want to consider is in line 2, degree programs leading to EC4, 4-8 certification, or EC12 special education must include the math, the science.
Okay. Everybody understand his recommendation? Are there objections to that recommendation? Okay. We can certainly carry that forward.
Are we going to be changing the word EC4 to EC6 on these things?
Yes, we've actually got some versions where we've gone through. The EC4 is still there for a little bit, and next year, I think. And so we've got some versions that have EC6, EC4. You go through, and down here it says EC4, EC6. So, just we'll make sure it all gets switched over when EC4 goes away. But right now, EC4 goes away. Okay? It's a little complicated to know what to put in there.
That hasn't changed.
All right. Other thoughts, comments for the good of the group? Seems like we've been at it for all day, and y'all have been very attentive, and I think we got a lot of good thoughts out and captured. Yes, ma'am.
I want to thank you for this history, because those of us, even that lived through it, have forgotten exactly where something came from. So
I know. It was embarrassing.
Helpful.
It's great.
Well, it was embarrassing to go through here and see stuff, and I think, I remember disagreeing with this. And those of you who remember Bill Sanford, you go to these dean's meetings with all of you in the room, and someone give this long question. Geiger would explain all these things, and can we do it this way? And Bill Sanford would sit there and go, no. And that was it. And so you go back and you read some of the letters, and there'll be this big, long question from the field, and there'll be no or yes. It's just, I thought that's Bill Sanford. So it was kind of fun to do that. But I was happy to do it because it had been so long since I'd been through it, and I had a gap. I left teacher ed probably in 93 when I went back to TEA, and I hadn't really been with the group until I came back last year. So there was this gap of, however many years it was, and so I thought, well, I've got to go figure out where the interpretations have wended as I've been out of this. So it was fun to do it, and I thought it would be helpful, because I've also run into so many folks who weren't here and who come in and they're from another place or whatever. They'll say, well, how, what does this mean, and why do we do this? And it'd be helpful. And we've got it up on the web, and if anybody can find other fugitive documents you think would be helpful, I'll be happy to incorporate them, and they're fugitive documents. So we'll try to keep it up, and that means the next person doesn't have to go back and relearn all of that. We thank you very much for your attendance, and safe travel back home, and keep us informed if things come up or if you need something.
Do you have a process where you're going to compile all this stuff? And so
Kevin and I will get together. He had mentioned he would put together something that would list some of our recommendations, and we'll get something out to you, and we'll come up with a process to kind of get it back and compile.
Maybe not share that with other people.
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome.